Excuse me, are you the help staff should use the side entrance? At the luxury gala, my own sister-in-law said it while handing me her empty glass. My brother sneered and my parents turned their backs, pretending they did not know me right in front of their executive guests. I did not cry. I quietly stepped away, pulled out my phone, and sent one email. The next morning, the CEO received a meeting request. The founding boss would like to discuss the $3 billion contract. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and for my entire life, I have been the ghost haunting my family pristine image. Growing up in a wealthy African-American household in Atlanta, success was not just expected, it was a performance. My parents, Evelyn and Thomas, worshipped the ground my older brother Marcus walked on. He was the golden child, the handsome heir apparent to their carefully curated legacy. I was the quiet girl who preferred reading financial reports to attending debutante balls. To them, I was a social liability. My refusal to conform to their rigid standards made me an outsider in my own home. Tonight was the Black Excellence Corporate Gala, the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta business season. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a breathtaking sea of bespoke tuxedos, vibrant silk gowns, and glittering crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff moved silently through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays filled with expensive champagne. I stood near a massive ice sculpture wearing a simple but immaculately tailored black gown. I did not wear flashy diamonds or carry a logo-covered handbag. True wealth whispers while new money screams. And tonight, my family was screaming for attention. I spotted them holding court near the center of the room. Marcus, newly appointed as the CEO of Vanguard Tech, was laughing loudly, completely in his element. He was surrounded by elite investors he desperately needed to impress. Vanguard Tech was bleeding money due to his terrible mismanagement, but he hid it well behind designer suits. Clinging to his arm was his wife, Chloe. Chloe was a white woman who had married into our family 2 years ago and immediately adopted a terrifying level of entitlement, weaponizing her tears whenever she did not get her way. As I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, Marcus caught my eye from across the room. His confident smile vanished instantly. I watched the sheer panic wash over his face. In his mind, his college dropout sister had somehow snuck into an exclusive event and was about to ruin his carefully crafted image. He whispered something urgently into Chloe's ear, and the two of them marched over to me, effectively cutting me off from the main crowd and backing me into a secluded corner. Chloe looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my unadorned neck and my simple dress. She thrust her empty champagne flute directly into my hand. "Excuse me, are you the help?" she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and microaggression. "Staff should really use the side entrance. You are making the executive guests uncomfortable by loitering here." Marcus stood right behind her, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "What the hell are you doing here, Maya?" he hissed, leaning in close so the nearby investors would not hear him. "This is an event for the elite. Do not embarrass me in front of Mr. Sterling. He is the most important man in this room, and I am not letting you ruin my networking opportunities. Get out through the kitchen before security sees you and makes a scene." Before I could even formulate a response, my parents Evelyn and Thomas drifted past our corner. They were busy schmoozing with a group of prominent local politicians. Evelyn made direct eye contact with me. For a split second, I thought she might say something maybe correct, Chloe blatant disrespect, maybe acknowledge her own daughter standing right in front of her. Instead, she deliberately turned her head, placing a manicured hand on a politician arm and laughing loudly at a joke. Thomas followed suit, literally turning his back to me to physically block me from their prestigious circle. They were pretending I did not exist. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or give them the angry reaction they were practically begging for. I just looked at the empty glass in my hand, feeling the cold condensation against my skin, then looked back at Marcus and Chloe. "Still pretending I do not exist," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. Just like that time you left me alone in the emergency room with a broken arm because you absolutely had to attend Marcus' frat party. Some things never change. Evelyn and Thomas will always look the other way as long as the golden child gets to shine. Chloe scoffed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder in an exaggerated motion. You are so bitter and aggressive, Maya. This is exactly why your family keeps you away. Just leave before we have you thrown out. I handed the empty glass back to Marcus, letting it clink sharply against his expensive watch. Have a wonderful evening, Marcus, I whispered. I hope your investors are truly impressed by your performance tonight. I turned and walked away, my heels completely silent on the plush hotel carpet. I did not leave through the kitchen or the side entrance like Chloe suggested. I walked straight out the main double doors, nodding politely to the valet staff as they opened them for me. The cool night air hit my face as I stood on the pristine driveway. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened my highly secure private email client. I selected the address for the Vanguard Tech Board of Directors. I typed a single decisive message. Freeze the $3 billion capital injection immediately. The founding boss will see the CEO at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I hit send, slid the phone back into my bag, and stepped into my waiting car. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vanguard Tech, but the atmosphere inside the executive suite was ice cold. Marcus paced the length of his imported Persian rug, his expensive Italian leather shoes digging into the fibers. His tailored suit jacket was discarded on the sofa. He stared at his computer monitor, where a flashing red banner from Apex Holdings indicated a complete freeze on the $3 billion capital injection. Without those funds, Vanguard Tech would not make payroll by Friday. The company he had inherited a fake CEO title for was hours away from insolvency. His assistant David stood trembling by the door, holding a stack of printed financial reports. Marcus snatched the papers from David's hands and threw them across the room. "Do not just stand there," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Get the bank on the phone. Get Apex Holdings on the line. I am the golden child of the Williams family. I do not get defunded. My parents built a legacy so I could sit in this chair. I am not about to lose it because some faceless shadow entity woke up on the wrong side of the bed." David scrambled to pick up the scattered papers. "Sir, the contact number for Apex Holdings is completely dead. The only communication we received is the meeting request for 8 o'clock. The founding boss is already in the building." Before Marcus could scream again, the heavy oak doors swung open and Chloe rushed in. Her designer makeup was smudged, and she clutched her luxury handbag like a life preserver. "Marcus, you have to fix this right now," she demanded, ignoring the panic in the room. "My black card was just declined at the dealership. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have your payment for a custom Tesla bounce in front of the entire sales staff? You promised me this lifestyle, Marcus. You told me marrying into the Williams family meant unlimited access." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a migraine forming. "Chloe, I am dealing with a corporate crisis. Apex Holdings pulled our funding. If I do not fix this in 20 minutes, there will be no Tesla. There will be no house. We will be completely bankrupt." Chloe's face drained of color. She dropped onto the leather sofa, her white tears falling instantly. "I cannot be poor, Marcus. I left a very comfortable life for this. Your mother, Evelyn, swore to me that your position was bulletproof. She said you were the undeniable heir to the tech industry. She said your sister was the only failure in the family and that all the resources would belong to us." Marcus slammed his fist on the desk. "Leave Maya out of this. My parents spent my entire life shielding me from failure. They paid off my professors, they covered up my reckless spending, and they bought me this CEO title to save face. I am not going to let it all crash down now because of a temporary cash flow problem. Wipe your face, Chloe. We are going into that boardroom, and we are going to beg this founding boss for our lives. We will offer them equity, we will offer them board seats, we will offer them whatever they want just to turn the money back on." At exactly 5 minutes to 8, Marcus and Chloe entered the executive boardroom. The room was massive, designed to intimidate, with dark mahogany paneled walls and a massive glass table overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The chief legal officer of Vanguard Tech, a stern man named Richard, was already there reviewing a thick legal binder. He did not look up when they entered. "Who is this founding boss?" Richard Marcus asked, smoothing his tie and attempting to project a confidence he did not feel. "What do we know about them?" Richard finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "We know they acquired 60% of Vanguard Tech debt over the last 3 years. We know they operate through a series of ghost corporations, and we know they have the power to liquidate this entire company before lunch. I suggest you grovel, Marcus." Chloe sniffled, gripping Marcus' arm. "Just smile and use your charm," she whispered. "Your parents always said your charm could get you out of anything." The digital clock on the wall clicked to exactly 8 o'clock. The heavy double doors at the end of the boardroom clicked open. Marcus pasted on his most winning smile, stepping forward with his hand outstretched, ready to greet the billionaire savior of his company. Chloe stood up straight, practicing her most demure and welcoming expression. Footsteps echoed against the polished marble floor. A figure stepped into the light of the boardroom. Marcus' extended hand froze in midair. His winning smile completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stumbled backward against her chair. Maya walked into the room. She was no longer wearing the simple black gown from the gala. She wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored crimson suit that screamed absolute power and authority. She did not look at her brother or her sister-in-law. She walked straight past them with measured, purposeful steps. She reached the head of the mahogany table, set her leather briefcase down with a resounding thud, and took the seat reserved for the founding boss. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. The sound of Maya setting her briefcase on the mahogany table echoed like a gunshot. She unbuttoned her crimson blazer with a calm, deliberate motion and sat down in the high-backed leather executive chair. The very chair Marcus had paid an interior designer thousands of dollars to select specifically for the ultimate authority figure in the building. He had assumed an old, wealthy white man would be sitting there today. Instead, he was staring at the sister he had humiliated just 12 hours ago. Chloe was visibly trembling. Her eyes darted from Maya to Marcus and back again. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The arrogant woman who had asked Maya to use the side entrance was now suffocating in her own hubris. The chief legal officer, Richard, closed his binder and nodded respectfully to Maya. "Good morning, boss," he said clearly, showing he had known her identity all along. Maya gave Richard a curt nod before returning her gaze to her brother. The silence stretched until Marcus looked like he was about to pass out. "You," Marcus finally choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is a mistake. You are just a failed venture capitalist. Mom and Dad said your business went bankrupt years ago." Maya leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "Mom and Dad believe what they want to believe, Marcus. They needed to believe I failed so they could justify investing every dime of family money into your fake empire. But numbers do not lie. I did not go bankrupt. I bought out your investors. I bought your debt. I bought your building. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I own you." "Good morning, Marcus. We have a lot to discuss regarding your upcoming termination." Marcus erupted into a loud, booming laugh that bounced right off the dark mahogany walls of the executive suite. He clapped his two hands together, shaking his head, as if he had just witnessed a brilliant comedy routine. He looked at Chloe, who was still tightly clutching her designer handbag with white knuckles. Then he looked back at Maya. "You actually had me for a second," he said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "I do not know how you got past the lobby security. Maybe you bribed the janitor since you dress like one. But this little childish prank is over." Maya simply did not blink. She leaned back in the high-backed leather chair, steepled her fingers, and watched him. Marcus reached for the sleek silver phone on the center of the conference table. "I am calling building security to have you escorted out in handcuffs," he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "You have always been insanely jealous of me, Maya. Mom and Dad always warned me that your bitterness over dropping out of college would make you do something crazy. But breaking into my boardroom to pretend you are a billionaire investor. You need psychiatric help." He pressed the button for security. Before the call could connect, a hand reached out and disconnected the line. It was Richard, the chief legal officer. He stood up slowly, smoothing his tailored suit jacket. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Marcus put the phone down. Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Address: Ms. Maya Williams, with the respect she commands. Do not speak to her like a trespasser. She is the founder of Apex Holdings. She legally owns 70% of this company. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash, before the screaming begins. Marcus' hand hovered over the phone, trembling. Chloe's face drained of all color. The bronzer on her cheeks suddenly looked like dirt against her paper-white skin. She slowly sank into the nearest chair, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "That is impossible," Marcus stammered, looking frantically from Richard to Maya. "Apex Holdings is a private equity firm out of New York. They bought out my original angel investors. They hold our debt. They hold the voting rights. Maya is a college dropout. She lives in a cheap apartment. Mom said she was struggling to pay rent." Maya unlocked her leather briefcase. The click of the metal clasps sounded like a guillotine dropping. She pulled out a thick, bound financial ledger and tossed it across the massive glass table. It slid perfectly, stopping right at Marcus' fingertips. "You thought I was a broke college dropout because I did not let Mom and Dad dictate my major?" Maya said, her voice dangerously calm. "You all loved that narrative. It made you feel so superior. You loved telling your country club friends that the black sheep of the family was a failure. It gave you the perfect cover story. But open the ledger, Marcus. Look at the transaction history from 10 years ago." Marcus' hands shook violently as he opened the thick book. His eyes darted across the highlighted columns. "While you were snorting away Dad retirement fund in VIP club bathrooms across Atlanta, I was building an empire." Maya continued, her words hitting him like physical blows. "You ran 2 different tech startups into the ground before Vanguard. Mom and Dad mortgaged their future to bail you out and keep your golden boy image completely spotless. They blamed your failures on the economy. They blamed your failures on bad partners. They even blamed your failures on me, saying my bad energy brought a curse on the family name. Meanwhile, I took the $3,000 I saved from waiting tables and invested it into a logistics software company that went public. Then I bought another, and another. I created Apex Holdings to shield my assets from people exactly like you." Chloe finally found her voice. Her pitch was high and panicked. "You cannot own Vanguard," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Maya. "We are the face of this company. We are featured in magazines. We just signed a lease on a $10 million mansion in Buckhead. If you own the company, then you have to release the $3 billion right now. We are family. You have to support your brother." Maya slowly turned her gaze to Chloe. The air in the room grew instantly colder. "You handed me an empty champagne glass last night, Chloe. You asked if I was the help. You told me to use the side entrance. You did that in front of the very executives who rely on my capital to keep their own businesses afloat. You do not get to invoke the word family now. You married Marcus for his proximity to wealth and power. Well, I am the wealth. I am the power. And I am cutting off your supply." Maya stood up, planting both hands on the table. She looked directly down at her brother, who was now sweating profusely. "Marcus, you have played CEO for 3 years. In that time, you have managed to drive a highly profitable sector into the ground because you spent company funds on private jets, luxury vacations, and impressing people who do not care about you. You have absolutely no business running a tech firm." "You cannot fire me!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "Mom and Dad will destroy you for this. They will ruin your reputation in Atlanta." "They can certainly try," Maya said. "But as of this exact second, you are officially terminated from the position of Chief Executive Officer. I am stripping you of your board seat, your executive privileges, and your company credit cards." Chloe let out a loud gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "The Tesla," she whimpered. "The house closing." Maya ignored her, keeping her eyes locked on Marcus. "However, because I am a generous sister, I am not throwing you out on the street. Vanguard Tech still needs someone to crunch the lowest level data. I am demoting you to junior analyst. You will work in the basement cubicles. You will report to a manager who is 10 years younger than you. You will clock in at 8 in the morning, and you will not leave until the work is done. Your salary is now $60,000 a year. Marcus' face turned purple with rage. 60,000! I cannot live on that. My car payment alone is more than that. I will not do it. I will quit. If you quit, I will immediately call in your personal debts to the company, Maya stated, pulling a secondary contract from her briefcase. You borrowed heavily against your shares, Marcus. Shares that are now completely worthless without my capital injection. If you walk out that door, you will owe Apex Holdings $4 million payable within 30 days. You will be bankrupt before the end of the month. Marcus stared at the contract, completely defeated. His shoulders slumped, and the arrogant posture he had maintained for a lifetime dissolved into nothing. Maya picked up her briefcase and walked toward the door. She stopped right behind Marcus' chair and leaned down, whispering near his ear. You want to keep your company car, Marcus? Get me a coffee. Black. I expect it on my desk in 5 minutes. Maya walked out of the boardroom, leaving her brother and his wife sitting in the wreckage of their fake empire. She did not look back. The real war was just beginning because she knew exactly who Marcus would run to next. I returned to my actual headquarters at Apex Holdings, a sleek glass and steel tower that I owned in its entirety. My penthouse office occupied the top floor, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The space was completely silent, save for the quiet hum of the climate control system. I sat behind my desk, constructed from a single slab of reclaimed walnut, and took a slow sip of the black coffee Marcus had tearfully delivered to me just an hour earlier. It tasted exactly like victory. But I knew the silence in my office was temporary. You do not strip a golden child of his crown without drawing the wrath of the people who forged it. Right on cue, the private elevator doors at the end of the hall chimed. The muffled sound of a scuffle broke the silence, followed by my head of security speaking in a firm warning tone. A woman's shrill voice pierced right through the thick acoustic glass of my office walls. Get your hands off my designer coat, you glorified mall cop. I am Evelyn Williams. I gave birth to the woman who signs your paychecks, and I will not be told to wait in a lobby. The heavy double doors to my office flew open with a violent crash. My mother Evelyn stormed in wearing her finest Sunday church suit, her face twisted into a mask of absolute fury. My father Thomas marched closely behind her, his face flushed a deep, angry red. He pointed a thick finger at my security guard, who was standing in the doorway looking at me for a command. I raised my hand and gave the guard a brief nod. He stepped back and let the doors click shut, leaving me alone with the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible. Evelyn did not even take a breath. She marched straight up to my desk and slammed both of her palms down onto the polished wood. What is wrong with you, Maya? She screamed, her voice vibrating with outrage. Have you completely lost your mind? Your brother just called me having a literal panic attack in a basement cubicle. He is a chief executive officer. He is the face of black excellence in this city. You will pick up your phone right now, call Human Resources at Vanguard Tech, and reinstate his position immediately. I set my coffee mug down on a slate coaster. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I just watched her chest heave as she gasped for air. He drove the company into the ground, Evelyn, I said plainly. Vanguard Tech was 48 hours away from missing payroll. I stepped in to protect my investment. Marcus is lucky he is not facing federal charges for financial negligence. Thomas stepped up beside my mother, his jaw tight. You do not talk about your brother that way, he barked. Marcus is a visionary. The market is just tough right now. You have no right to humiliate him in front of his wife and his colleagues. You are his sister. You are supposed to protect him. Instead, you play these vindictive little games hiding a massive fortune from your own family while we stressed over Vanguard finances. Evelyn cut back and pointing a long manicured nail at my face. You lied to us. You let us believe you were struggling. If you have the kind of money to buy out an entire tech firm, then you have been holding out on your blood. We are family, Maya. You owe us. I want Marcus reinstated as CEO with a 20% raise for the emotional distress you caused him today. And since you apparently own this massive equity firm, I am drawing up papers for you to transfer 20% of your company directly into our family trust. Consider it payment for raising you. I let out a low, humorless laugh that made them both stop. I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached inside and pulled out a manila folder that I had kept perfectly preserved for 5 years. Payment, I asked, dropping the folder onto the desk. I flipped it open, revealing a stack of highly detailed banking records and a copy of a cashed check. You want to talk about payment? Evelyn, I said, leaning forward. Let us talk about the $150,000 you and Thomas completely drained from the college trust fund Big Mama left specifically for me. Evelyn's face twitched. She instinctively took a half step back from the desk, but her eyes remained locked on the bank statements. Big Mama knew you two would pour every resource into Marcus. I continued, keeping my tone deadly cold. She set up that trust so I could get my degree without begging you for scraps. But when I went to the bank to pay my tuition, I found an empty account. I found a withdrawal slip with my signature expertly forged right at the bottom. You stole my future to pay for Chloe's extravagant country club wedding. You bought imported orchids and a 6-tier cake with the money meant for my education. Thomas crossed his arms, puffing out his chest to project authority. Do not act like a victim, Maya. We made a parental executive decision. Marcus was marrying into a very prominent family. Chloe's parents expected a certain standard of living. We needed that wedding to be flawless to secure our social standing in the community. You were just taking community college classes. You did not need that kind of money to read books. The family needed the social capital. You should have been proud to contribute to your brother's success. You committed wire fraud and identity theft to buy an ice sculpture shaped like a swan. Thomas, I corrected him. That is not an executive decision. That is a felony. Evelyn slammed her hand on the desk again, trying to regain control of the room. I do not care about some ancient bank account, Maya. We clothed you. We fed you. We gave you the Williams name. You will give your brother his company back, and you will treat this family with the respect we deserve. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. Or what? Thomas slammed both of his hands down next to his wife, leaning over the desk, so his face was inches from mine. His eyes were wide and filled with desperate malice. Or I will sell Big Mama House. Thomas snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly pitch. The room went dead silent. Big Mama House was a historic Victorian property in the heart of the city. It was the anchor of the Williams family. It was where our ancestors had gathered, where the sacred Sunday dinners were held, and where my only happy childhood memories lived. I am the executor of her estate, Thomas continued, seeing that he had finally struck a nerve. The title is in my name. If you do not pick up that phone and give your brother his life back, I will call a developer tomorrow morning. I will sell the property to the highest bidder. They will bulldoze that house to the ground and put up condos. And I will make absolutely sure that you never step foot on that property again. You will lose the only piece of your grandmother you have left. I looked at my father. I looked at the sheer desperation and cruelty swimming in his eyes. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he had played the ultimate trump card. I did not scream. I did not beg him to reconsider. I simply looked at him and smiled a deadly, chilling smile. I simply smiled a deadly, chilling smile at my father. Go ahead and try, Thomas, I whispered. Let us see how far you get. I pressed a button under my desk, and 2 guards instantly appeared. My parents yelled and cursed as they were forced into the private elevator. I did not even look up as the doors slid shut. I had much bigger issues to handle. Exactly 3 hours later, my receptionist announced another uninvited guest. Chloe had managed to slip past the lobby screening by weeping uncontrollably to the front desk staff. I allowed her up out of pure curiosity. She stumbled into my office clutching a crumpled luxury tissue, looking like a tragic heroine in a cheap soap opera. She collapsed into the leather chair opposite my desk, and the waterworks began immediately. Great, heaving sobs echoed through the room. Maya, you have to stop this, she cried heavily, wiping her eyes. You do not understand the pressure I am under. Being a mother and a wife to a man like Marcus is exhausting. We have a lifestyle to maintain. We have expectations. You are destroying my family. I sat back and watched the performance. Chloe had perfected the art of weaponizing her distress. She used it to get out of traffic tickets, to manipulate my parents, and to force Marcus into buying her whatever she wanted. Now she was trying to use it on me. "You are being an angry, aggressive bully, Maya," she sobbed, her voice rising in pitch. "You are attacking your own flesh and blood because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of my marriage and our success. You are acting like a thug coming into his office and stealing his hard-earned position. It is completely toxic and I cannot take it anymore." I let her cry. I did not offer her water. I did not offer comfort. I just stared at her until the silence in the room became unbearable. When she realized the tears were not working, her expression hardened. The sobbing stopped instantly. The tragic heroine vanished, replaced by a cornered rat. "If you do not give Marcus his job back and unfreeze our accounts, I am going straight to the media," Chloe threatened, leaning forward. "I have connections at 3 different local news outlets. I will tell them exactly what you did. I will spin this so fast your head will spin. I will tell the world that Maya Williams is a ruthless corporate raider who destroyed a Black-owned family business just to satisfy a petty grudge. I will say you verbally abused me and threatened my children. The media loves an angry, aggressive Black woman narrative, Maya. Your investors will run for the hills when they see what a monster you really are." She sat back, crossing her arms, looking incredibly smug. She thought she had me checkmated. She thought her white tears and her insidious threats of public ruin were the ultimate leverage. She truly believed I would fold to protect my reputation. I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a contract reinstating Marcus. I pulled out a sleek black remote control. I pointed it at the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall to my left. The screen flickered to life. It was not a spreadsheet. It was security footage from the Vanguard Tech server room. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 3 weeks ago at 2 in the morning. Chloe's smug expression evaporated instantly. Her mouth fell open. The high-definition video showed Chloe sneaking into the highly restricted server room using Marcus' executive access card. It showed her plugging a high-capacity external hard drive directly into the mainframe. The screen captured her typing furiously, bypassing internal firewalls to download Vanguard proprietary source code. The exact algorithm that was supposed to revolutionize their logistics tracking and save the company. "You really thought you were smarter than everyone else, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "You knew Marcus was running Vanguard Tech into the ground. You knew the money was running out. So you decided to secure your own golden parachute. You downloaded our proprietary code to sell to our biggest rival in Silicon Valley. You were going to let the company collapse and run off with the cash, leaving Marcus holding the bag." Chloe was hyperventilating now. Her chest heaved, but this time the panic was absolutely real. "That is not me," she stammered, her eyes darting toward the door. "The lighting is bad. You cannot prove anything." I pressed another button. An audio recording began to play. It was a phone call between Chloe and a tech broker in California, negotiating the price of the stolen code down to the exact dollar amount. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every single word of her treason was documented. "Apex Holdings security teams monitor every single byte of data that moves through our subsidiaries," I explained, tossing the remote onto the desk. "You tripped a silent alarm the second you plugged that drive in. I have had this footage for 3 weeks. I watched you steal from my company, and I waited. You are not a victim, Chloe. You are a corporate spy committing federal wire fraud and espionage." She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Maya," she begged, her voice muffled by her shaking fingers. "Please do not call the police. I will do anything. If I go to prison, I will lose everything. Marcus will leave me. My parents will disown me. Please." I looked at the woman who had handed me an empty champagne glass just last night. The woman who had told me to use the side entrance because I was not fit to mingle with the elite. She was currently begging for her life in my office. "I am not going to call the police, Chloe," I said. She looked up, hope flashing in her tear-filled eyes. "You are not." "No, I am not." I reached into my desk one final time and pulled out a cheap plastic burner phone. I slid it across the smooth wooden surface, until it stopped right in front of her trembling hands. Because sending you to prison is far too easy, and it does not help me achieve my actual goals. Chloe stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? You work for me now, Chloe. I stated, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. You belong to me. You are going to go back to your newly demoted husband, and you are going to play the supportive, loving wife. You are going to smile at Sunday dinners, and you are going to pretend everything is perfectly fine. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, locking my eyes onto hers. And your first job is to find out exactly how much debt my parents are hiding. Evelyn and Thomas are desperate, and desperate people get sloppy. I want bank statements. I want mortgage documents. I want the names of every private lender they owe money to. You are going to dig through their lives and report every single detail back to me on that phone. If you fail, if you lie, or if you breathe a word of this to Marcus, the FBI gets the server room video. Do we have a clear understanding? Chloe slowly reached out and took the burner phone. Her hands were shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Yes, she whispered, her voice completely broken. I understand. Good, I said, pointing toward the door. Now get out of my office, you have work to do. Chloe practically sprinted out of my office, the heavy doors shutting behind her with a soft click. I sat back in my chair and stared at the empty space she had just occupied. The game had shifted. I had my spy inside their house. But I knew Evelyn Williams better than anyone. She was not a woman who retreated after a defeat. She was a woman who burned the entire battlefield to the ground. It took less than 12 hours for the smoke to reach me. My private cell phone vibrated against the walnut desk at exactly 7 in the morning. Then it buzzed again. And again. By the time I picked it up, the screen was flooded with notifications. They were not from my board of directors or my financial analysts. They were from the extended Williams family group chat, a thread I had kept on mute for the past 5 years. Today it was fully active. I opened a link someone had forwarded from Facebook. There was my mother's face plastered across a live video feed. Evelyn was sitting in her pristine living room, clutching a crumpled tissue, looking directly into the camera, with perfectly manufactured sorrow. She had deployed her ultimate weapon, the church community and the extended family network. My heart is completely shattered, Evelyn cried to her audience of hundreds of church members, aunts, uncles, and Atlanta socialites. The daughter Thomas and I raised with so much love and sacrifice has turned into a money-hungry sociopath. Maya has lost her mind. She is using her wealth to terrorize her own flesh and blood. She illegally forced her way into Vanguard Tech and fired her own brother out of pure spite. She is mentally abusing Marcus and his fragile wife Chloe. Chloe is terrified for her children. Pray for our family. Please pray for Maya, because the devil has truly taken hold of her soul. I watched the video twice, my expression completely flat. The comments rolling in beneath the video were a tidal wave of misplaced righteous anger. Relatives who had not spoken to me since I dropped out of college were suddenly experts on my psychology. They called me ungrateful. They called me a bully. They said I was trying to steal Black generational wealth from the rightful heir. Evelyn had successfully flipped the narrative, framing herself and Marcus as the innocent victims of my sudden, unprovoked corporate rampage. My phone rang in my hand. The caller ID flashed the name, Aunt Shirley. Shirley was my father's oldest sister, the loudest gossip in our family, and the unofficial matriarch of their church congregation. If Evelyn was the general of this smear campaign, Aunt Shirley was the frontline artillery. I swiped to answer, placing the phone on speaker and setting it back down on my desk. Maya Williams, you have absolutely lost your mind, Aunt Shirley bellowed immediately, her voice echoing through my office. I just got off the phone with your mother. She is hyperventilating. Thomas is talking about calling the police. How dare you walk into that boy company and humiliate him? You have always been a bitter, jealous little girl, but this is a new low. You need to get down on your knees and beg that family for forgiveness before God strikes you down. I calmly poured myself a fresh cup of coffee from the silver carafe on my desk. Are you finished, Shirley? I asked. Do not use that tone with me, Aunt Shirley snapped. You think because you have a little bit of money now you can disrespect your elders. Marcus is building a legacy for this family. He is providing for a wife and children. You are a single woman with nothing but a bank account and a cold heart. You are destroying the Williams name. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The Williams name was destroyed the second Marcus took control of it, I said, leaning toward the speaker. You want to talk about destroying a legacy, Shirley? Let us talk about Big Mama House. What does my mother house have to do with your psychotic behavior? She demanded. It has everything to do with it, I replied, my voice dropping to a sharp, icy register. Mom is telling everyone, I am evil. Did she happen to mention why Marcus Company was out of money? Did Evelyn tell her prayer circle that she and Thomas secretly took out a massive second mortgage on Big Mama Historic House just to cover Marcus' offshore gambling debts? The line went dead silent. I could hear Aunt Shirley's sharp intake of breath. That is right, I continued, not giving her a second to recover. Evelyn and Thomas leveraged the only piece of real generational wealth this family has left. They gambled Big Mama legacy to pay off the bookies Marcus owes in the Bahamas. They drained my college fund years ago, and when that was not enough, they put a lien on the house your mother built from nothing. I did not attack Vanguard Tech out of spite, Shirley. I took it over because Marcus was 30 days away from facing federal indictment for embezzlement. You want to pray for someone? Pray for Thomas when the bank comes to collect. Maya, that is impossible. Aunt Shirley stammered, her booming voice suddenly reduced to a weak whisper. Thomas is the executor. He promised he would never touch the equity on that house. Call him and ask him, I challenged. Ask him why he threatened to sell it to developers yesterday. Ask Evelyn why she is crying on Facebook instead of calling a financial advisor. Aunt Shirley did not say another word. The line clicked and went dead. She had hung up in absolute shock. I knew she was already dialing Thomas' number. The smear campaign was about to implode from the inside out. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the desk. Evelyn thought she could control the narrative by playing the victim, but she forgot that I did not care about my social standing. I only cared about the bottom line. And the bottom line was that they were running out of time. Just as I opened my laptop to review the morning market reports, a specialized encrypted alert popped up on my screen. It was not a message from Chloe. It was an automated notification from the proprietary financial tracking software I use to monitor Apex Holdings' aggressive acquisitions. My system tracked high-risk debt across the entire southeastern seaboard. I clicked the alert, pulling up a digitized bank ledger. My eyes scanned the flashing red text. It was the mortgage file for Big Mama House, the exact loan Evelyn and Thomas had secretly taken out. The numbers stared back at me, stark and undeniable. The account had been flagged for severe delinquency. Evelyn and Thomas had missed 4 consecutive payments. They had completely drained their liquid assets trying to keep Marcus afloat, and they had defaulted on the loan. I read the final line of the banking alert and felt a cold, sharp thrill radiate through my chest. The grace period had officially expired at midnight. The bank holding the second mortgage had triggered the final clause. The property was in default, and the bank was foreclosing on Big Mama House tomorrow morning. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning when I made the move. I did not bother calling customer service representatives or branch managers. I dialed the direct line to the regional vice president of the bank holding my parents' fraudulent mortgage. I told him Apex Holdings was prepared to purchase their entire portfolio of distressed residential assets in the Atlanta metro area by noon. But the multi-million-dollar deal hinged on one specific property being carved out and transferred directly into my personal holding trust immediately. Big Mama House. The bank executive was thrilled to offload the bad debt without going through a lengthy and expensive legal eviction process. By 10 o'clock, a courier arrived at my penthouse office with a thick leather-bound portfolio containing the physical documents. I sat at my walnut desk and opened the file. The original deed was sitting right there on top. I reached out and gently traced the faded blue ink of my grandmother's signature. Big Mama had written her name with such pride when she bought that house free and clear 50 years ago. My finger moved down to the bottom of the page where Evelyn and Thomas had added their names, forging the documents to leverage the property for Marcus. Looking at their messy, arrogant signatures, I felt a burning sensation tight in my chest. I remembered the heavy rain pounding against the pavement the afternoon we buried Big Mama. I had returned from the cemetery completely hollow inside, just wanting to lay down in my childhood bedroom and grieve. But my key had not turned in the front door lock. Evelyn stood on the porch under a massive black umbrella and coldly informed me that my belongings were already in garbage bags by the side gate. She said Marcus and Chloe were moving into the main house to save money, and Chloe desperately needed my bedroom to use as her custom walk-in closet. Evelyn had literally locked me out in the freezing rain on the worst day of my life so her golden child entitled wife could have more space to store her designer shoes. I picked up my customized fountain pen. I signed my name right over the bank transfer line in thick black ink. It was done. The foreclosure was formally canceled. The bank no longer owned the historic Victorian house. I did. I held the sole legal deed. And the most beautiful part of this transaction was that Evelyn and Thomas were entirely oblivious. They had ignored the bank default notices for months, believing their social status and community connections would magically protect them from eviction. They thought they still had time to negotiate or beg for a final extension. They had absolutely no idea that their grace period had permanently expired, and that the person holding the keys to their entire universe was the daughter they had thrown away like trash. For the next few days, I let them live in their delusion. I sat in my office and monitored the situation through the burner phone I had forced Chloe to take. Chloe was terrified of going to federal prison for corporate espionage, so she proved to be a highly effective spy. She sent me a steady stream of encrypted text messages detailing the absolute chaos unfolding inside the Williams household. Thomas was secretly running around the city trying to secure high-interest payday loans to cover the missed mortgage payments, but his credit was completely destroyed. Evelyn was spending her days taking heavy sedatives and calling local politicians hoping to cash in on a favor that did not exist. Marcus was pretending to go to work as a CEO every single morning, putting on his custom-tailored suits and driving his luxury car only to sit in a windowless basement cubicle at Vanguard Tech doing basic data entry for a junior analyst's salary. Their entire reality was held together by duct tape and blind arrogance. They were drowning and fighting over who got to wear the captain hat on a sinking ship. Then Evelyn made her final desperate play. She realized the church community was whispering about her manic Facebook Live video. She knew people were starting to ask questions about Marcus' sudden lack of executive presence. She needed to reestablish her dominance immediately. She needed to prove to Atlanta high society that the Williams family was still wealthy, powerful, and completely untouchable. So she did what she always did when cornered. She planned an outrageously expensive event with money she absolutely did not have. My assistant walked into my office on Friday afternoon carrying a heavy cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. Evelyn had actually paid for hand-delivered calligraphy invitations. I opened the thick cardstock. It was an invitation to a massive Sunday dinner at Big Mama House to celebrate Marcus and his highly anticipated new business venture. Evelyn was doubling down on the lie. She was going to fill that historic home with 40 relatives, church elders, and local elites to toast a golden child who was currently drowning in gambling debt and fetching my coffee. She was going to use Big Mama fine china to serve a feast built on lies. I pulled the heavy card from the envelope and flipped it over. Evelyn had scrawled a handwritten note directly on the back just for me. The ink dug deep into the paper, showing the sheer force of her fury. Come see what a real family looks like, Maya. Come see a son who actually honors his parents. I read the words twice, letting the sheer audacity of her taunt wash over me. She wanted a performance. She wanted an audience to watch her parade her fake success. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the freshly stamped legal deed to the property. I carefully folded the document and slid it into my designer clutch. I was definitely going to attend that Sunday dinner. And I was going to show Evelyn exactly what ownership looked like. I pulled my sleek black town car onto the crowded street lined with luxury SUVs and sedans. Big Mama historic Victorian house stood at the end of the block, its wraparound porch glowing warmly under the twilight. The street was absolutely packed. Evelyn had clearly called in every favor and guilt trip she could muster to guarantee a massive turnout. I walked up the cracked concrete path, my designer clutch gripped firmly in my hand. I pushed open the heavy oak front door and the wall of sound hit me instantly. Over 40 relatives, church elders, and Atlanta social climbers were crammed into the formal living and dining rooms. The air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey collard greens and the suffocating scent of Evelyn's expensive perfume. I stood in the foyer unobserved for a few moments watching the performance. Right in the center of the room, Marcus was holding court. He held a crystal glass of bourbon, gesturing expansively to a group of my uncles and older cousins. We are in the seed funding stage for a revolutionary new algorithmic pivot. Marcus lied smoothly, his charismatic smile completely masking his utter desperation. Silicon Valley investors are practically begging to throw capital at my new venture. We are looking at a $50 million valuation by the third quarter. It is going to change the entire supply chain industry. He took a sip of his bourbon, soaking in the admiring nods from Uncle Frank and Reverend Davis. It was a pathetic, brilliant performance. I knew for a fact that his new venture consisted of updating spreadsheets in my basement cubicles for $60,000 a year. But the men nodded along, thoroughly impressed by the golden child unyielding resilience. Off to the side, Chloe was playing the perfect Southern hostess. She glided through the crowd, offering hors d'oeuvres with a tight, strained smile. She absolutely hated this house. She had complained for years that the floorboards creaked, and the neighborhood was entirely too working class for her refined tastes. But today she was playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, desperate to keep up the charade. Her eyes darted around the room constantly, full of nervous, frantic energy. When her gaze finally met mine across the room, she visibly flinched. She knew exactly why I was here. I tapped the pocket of my blazer, a silent reminder of the burner phone she currently had strapped to her body. She immediately looked away, her face turning pale. Then Evelyn spotted me. She was standing by the grand staircase wearing a royal blue dress that screamed for attention. The moment she saw me standing in the foyer, her smile vanished. She marched straight toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the original hardwood floors. The aggressive sound drew the attention of the entire room. Conversations died out one by one until 40 pairs of eyes were locked onto us. "What are you doing here, Maya?" Evelyn demanded, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I sent you that invitation as a courtesy so you could see the family you turned your back on. I did not actually expect you to show your face after what you did to your brother. You have some nerve coming into this sacred home." The aunties and uncles exchanged scandalous whispers. I could hear Aunt Shirley murmuring to a church elder about my demonic spirit. The smear campaign had clearly worked. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and outright disgust. They had bought Evelyn's story hook, line, and sinker. I did not flinch. I did not engage with her theatrics. I calmly walked past her, completely ignoring her aggressive posture, and made my way straight to the massive buffet table set up in the formal dining room. I picked up a silver serving spoon and slowly, deliberately began fixing myself a plate of food. Evelyn's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. She followed me into the dining room, flanked by Thomas and Marcus. "How dare you walk into this house and disrespect me?" Evelyn shrieked. "You come in here acting like you own the world just because you stole Marcus' company. You are a vindictive, bitter woman. You have no respect for this family or the traditions we built." I scooped a healthy portion of roasted vegetables onto my plate. I looked down at the delicate floral pattern painted on the porcelain rim. "I see you are still using Big Mama fine china, Evelyn," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the dead silent room. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the non sequitur. "What does the china have to do with your psychotic behavior?" she snapped, stepping closer. "Do not try to change the subject." I picked up the plate and held it up to the chandelier light, examining the delicate gold rim. "It is beautiful china." I continued, completely ignoring her outrage. "I remember the exact day you loaded it all into the trunk of your car. It was 2 weeks after Big Mama passed away. You told the family you were taking it to get professionally cleaned and appraised for the estate. but I know for a fact you took it straight to a high-end pawn shop in Buckhead because you needed quick cash to cover Marcus' private club membership fees. A collective gasp ripped through the room. I turned to face the crowd, making sure my voice carried to the back of the room. I had to send my own assistant to buy it back at a 200% markup just so this family could have something nice to eat on for Thanksgiving. You pawned family heirlooms to fund his golf habits. Aunt Shirley dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the floor, but nobody moved. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the color completely drained from her face. Marcus took a step back, looking around nervously at the uncles who were now staring at Evelyn with pure shock. "That is a lie," Thomas bellowed, stepping in front of his wife, his fists clenched at his sides. He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim the room through sheer physical intimidation. "You come into my house and spew these filthy lies to humiliate your mother. I will not stand for it." "Your house?" I asked, setting the porcelain plate down on the table. "Yes, my house," Thomas roared, his voice booming over the whispers of the crowd. "I am the executor of this estate. I am the head of this family. You are nothing but an ungrateful mistake. Get out. Get off my property right now before I throw you out myself." He pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see if the golden child father would actually physically remove me from the premises. Uncle Frank even took a half step forward, as if getting ready to assist him. I reached into my designer bag. My fingers brushed against the crisp, folded parchment. I pulled out the legal deed to the property, holding it up for a brief second, so the gold seal caught the light. I did not hand it to him. I did not gently place it on the table. I walked over to the centerpiece of Evelyn's lavish buffet. I held the deed directly over the massive crystal bowl of baked mac and cheese and simply let go. The heavy legal document dropped right into the center of the steaming pasta, sinking slightly into the melted cheese. Another collective gasp echoed from the aunties. "Actually, Thomas," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade, "it is my property. You defaulted on your secret second mortgage. I bought the debt, I hold the title, and you have exactly 30 days to vacate." Nobody moved. The entire dining room was frozen in a state of suspended animation. The smell of roasted turkey and expensive perfume was suddenly overpowered by the thick, suffocating stench of exposed lies. Uncle Frank was the first to break the paralysis. He stepped forward, pushing past Thomas, and reached directly into the center of the ruined buffet. He gripped the edge of the thick parchment paper and pulled it free from the cheese. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and wiped a smear of yellow sauce off the gold notary seal. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal text. He looked up, his face a mask of absolute horror. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. "Evelyn, what is this?" My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her royal blue dress suddenly looked absurdly out of place against her pale, terrified complexion. Uncle Frank turned the document around, holding it up for the entire room to see. "It says right here," he bellowed, the shock in his voice morphing into booming outrage. "It says a second mortgage was taken out against this property 2 years ago, and it says Apex Holdings. Maya corporate entity purchased the defaulted loan from the bank yesterday morning. Thomas, you mortgaged Mama House. You put a lien on the family sanctuary." The dining room instantly erupted into absolute chaos. Over 40 relatives began shouting at once. Aunt Shirley, who had just moments ago called me a demonic spirit, suddenly turned her righteous wrath entirely onto my mother. She shoved her way to the front of the crowd, pointing a manicured finger right in Evelyn's face. "You sat in my living room and cried about how Maya was a monster," Aunt Shirley screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You stood up in the church pulpit last Sunday and asked the congregation to pray for Maya's soul. And all this time you had secretly gambled away the house our parents broke their backs to build. You lied to God, Evelyn. You lied to your own blood." Thomas stepped in front of his wife, raising his hands in a desperate attempt to regain control of his crumbling kingdom. "Now hold on, everyone," Thomas yelled over the din of angry relatives. "You do not understand business. It was a temporary liquidity strategy. We were bridging a minor cash flow gap for Vanguard Tech. The market dipped unexpectedly, but we were going to pay it back. He was sweating profusely. The confident patriarch who had ordered me off the property just 2 minutes ago was now stammering like a cornered thief. "Do not you dare attack my parents," Marcus shouted, shoving his way to the center of the room. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Thomas, trying to project the image of the strong, successful CEO. He glared at the surrounding aunts and uncles. "You people have no idea how high-level corporate finance works. My company was restructuring. Mom and Dad made an executive investment in my vision. We hit a temporary setback, but my new venture is going to yield a $50 million valuation by next quarter. Maya is just twisting the facts to make us look bad because she is bitter." I did not let him finish his pathetic tech bro monologue. I reached into my designer bag for the second time. I pulled out a thick stack of printed bank statements bound together by a heavy black binder clip. I slammed the stack down onto the polished mahogany dining table right next to the ruined mac and cheese. The sharp crack of the paper hitting the wood silenced the entire room. "Temporary setback," I asked, walking slowly around the table until I was standing directly across from my brother. "Let us talk about your high-level corporate finance, Marcus." I flipped the binder open, revealing pages highlighted in bright neon yellow. "Let us talk about the wiring transfers." I continued, my voice echoing loudly in the dead quiet room. "Let us look at where the equity from Big Mama House actually went. Because it did not go into Vanguard Tech research and development. It did not go into payroll. It went directly into your personal offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." Marcus' face drained of all color. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping hard into the edge of the buffet table. I picked up the first page and read the highlighted figures aloud. $80,000 wired to a private luxury sports betting syndicate in the Bahamas. $120,000 lost in a highly leveraged cryptocurrency scam that you hid from your own board of directors. $50,000 for private jet charters so you could impress venture capitalists who ultimately rejected your terrible business models. I tossed the paper directly at his chest. It fluttered to the ground, landing on his expensive leather shoes. "You didn't just steal my college fund, Marcus," I said, delivering every word with surgical precision. "You stole the family's legacy to fund your lifestyle. You drained the only real wealth this family had left to play pretend on the internet. And when the money ran out, you let Evelyn and Thomas take the fall." The uncles and aunties stared at Marcus with unmasked disgust. The golden child narrative was officially dead and buried. He was no longer a visionary. He was a fraud, a thief, and a failure. Off to the side of the room, the sound of shattering glass cut through the tension. Chloe had dropped her silver serving tray. Delicate champagne flutes shattered into 100 pieces across the hardwood floor. But Chloe did not even look at the mess. Her eyes were locked onto Marcus. She had been feeding me financial documents for days, but even she had not known about the offshore gambling. She thought he had hidden a safety net. She thought there was a secret stash of millions waiting for them when the dust settled. She realized in that exact moment that the mine was completely empty. There was no secret fortune. There was no $50 million valuation. There was only massive, insurmountable debt. Chloe let out a sound that was half scream and half feral growl. She lunged across the room, shoving past Aunt Shirley, and grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his custom-tailored suit. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, shaking him violently. "You told me you were a millionaire. You told me we were buying a mansion in Buckhead. You told me the company was fine." Marcus tried to pry her hands off his jacket, looking frantically around the room for help. "Chloe, calm down," he stammered. "We are going to fix this. I have investors lined up." "Fix this!" she screamed back, her face turning a bright blotchy red. "You pawned your grandmother China to pay for your golf club. We do not even own our cars. We are broke, Marcus. We are completely ruined." She slapped him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room. Evelyn let out a horrified gasp, reaching out to pull Chloe away, but Chloe violently shoved my mother backward. "Do not touch me," Chloe snarled, turning her wrath on Evelyn. You both knew he was a failure and you covered it up. You let me marry into a bankrupt family." Chloe grabbed her purse from the entryway console table. She did not bother looking back at her husband, who was standing in the center of the room with a bright red handprint blossoming on his cheek. She threw the heavy oak front door open and stormed out into the night, leaving the Williams family standing in the smoking ruins of their fake empire. I stood by the buffet table watching the destruction unfold. I did not feel pity. I did not feel remorse. I looked at Evelyn, Thomas, and Marcus, who were now completely surrounded by angry relatives, demanding answers about their stolen legacy. I picked up my designer bag, smoothed the lapels of my blazer, and calmly walked out the front door. The 30-day countdown had officially begun. The heavy oak front door had barely settled into its frame when it was violently shoved back open. I was halfway across the foyer, my hand reaching for the brass handle, but I had to step back to avoid being hit. Chloe had not gone to her car. She had nowhere to go. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her credit cards were suspended, and the luxury SUV sitting in the driveway was leased under a company name that was currently plummeting toward bankruptcy. She marched right past me, the cool night air rushing in behind her. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She stepped back into the dining room, where Marcus was still backed against the buffet table, surrounded by the shocked whispers of our relatives. Chloe did not just raise her voice. She unleashed a hateful, gut-wrenching scream that stripped away every single ounce of her refined Southern belle persona. "I wasted 5 years of my youth on you!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking acrylic nail at my brother's face. 5 years pretending to tolerate this family. You told me you were a tech visionary, Marcus. You told me you were the next big thing in Atlanta. You promised me a mansion in Buckhead and summers in Europe. I only married you for the Vanguard tech money, and now you are telling me you pawned your grandmother plates to pay a bookie. Marcus held his hands up, palms facing outward, trying to shush her. Chloe, please keep your voice down. The elders are right here. We can talk about this at home. We do not have a home, you pathetic loser, she screamed, batting his hands away. You are a fraud. Your entire family is a fraud. I sat through countless Sunday dinners pretending to like your overly seasoned food and listening to your parents brag about wealth they do not even have. You are all just a bunch of classless ghetto pretenders, playing dress-up in a historic house you cannot even afford. The entire room erupted. Aunt Shirley clutched her chest, letting out a loud, indignant gasp. Uncle Frank took a threatening step forward, but Thomas threw his arm out to stop him. The pristine image of the Williams family, the carefully cultivated narrative of Black excellence that Evelyn had spent decades protecting, was completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. The white daughter-in-law they had practically worshipped, the woman they had drained my college fund to impress, was standing in their sacred dining room, calling them ghetto frauds to their faces. Evelyn's face turned a mottled shade of purple. You ungrateful little tramp, Evelyn hissed, stepping toward Chloe. We gave you everything. We treated you like royalty. You treated me like an accessory. Chloe spat back, her eyes wild and frantic. And I only played along because I thought the checkbook was bottomless. But there is no money. There is no legacy. You are all completely broke. Chloe spun around, her chest heaving, and her eyes locked onto me, standing calmly in the foyer. The frantic rage in her expression suddenly shifted into a desperate, manic calculation. She realized she was standing on a sinking ship, and I was the only person in the room holding a life raft. She literally shoved past Aunt Shirley and sprinted toward me. "Maya, wait!" Chloe pleaded, her voice dropping to a frantic conspiratorial whisper as she grabbed my forearm. I yanked my arm away, brushing my sleeve as if she had stained the fabric. Chloe ignored my disgust and stepped closer, blocking my exit. Maya, listen to me. I know you hate him. I know you want to ruin him. I can help you destroy him completely. Just give me a cut. Give me a percentage, and I will give you everything. I looked at her completely unfazed. Give me what exactly, Chloe? The code, she whispered, her eyes darting back toward the dining room to make sure Marcus could not hear. The proprietary Vanguard algorithm. I downloaded the entire source code to that external hard drive before you fired him. I still have it. I know exactly how to bypass the security protocols. I can hand you the absolute core of his business. You can patent it under Apex Holdings and wipe Vanguard off the map forever. Just pay me $2 million, and it is yours. We can crush him together, Maya. I stared at her, letting the sheer pathetic desperation of her offer hang in the air. She was willing to sell out her husband, her marriage, and her own criminal liability for a quick payday. She was a corporate spy trying to bargain with stolen goods. I stepped back, looking her up and down with absolute revulsion. You really are not very bright, are you, Chloe? I said, my voice carrying clearly back into the dining room. Her desperate smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean, you are offering to sell me something I already own, I replied coldly. I bought Vanguard Tech debt. I hold 70% of the voting shares. I am the majority shareholder of the entire enterprise. The algorithm you stole belongs to me. You broke into a federal server room to steal proprietary software that I already possess. Your stolen code is completely worthless. And frankly, so are you. Chloe's jaw dropped. The last sliver of hope vanished from her eyes, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated terror. She backed away from me, stumbling over the edge of the expensive Persian rug. Before anyone else could speak, a harsh, sweeping light cut through the darkness outside. Bright flashes of blue and red illuminated the stained glass panels of the heavy oak front door. The rhythmic sweep of the police cruiser lights cast dancing shadows across the foyer, reflecting off the horrified faces of my aunts and uncles. A sharp knock hammered against the heavy wood. Suddenly, a loud, piercing laugh echoed from the back of the dining room. It was not a normal laugh. It was a manic, unhinged cackle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned to see Evelyn stepping out from behind Thomas. Her royal blue dress was wrinkled and her perfectly styled hair was slightly out of place, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying, victorious fire. I called them, Evelyn announced, her voice ringing out with manic glee. I called the police the second you dropped that fake deed on my table, Maya. The room went dead silent again, except for the heavy knocking at the front door. You really thought you could come into my house and threaten me? Evelyn taunted, walking slowly toward the foyer. You thought you could parade around here talking about foreclosures and buying our debt. You are a liar, Maya. You forged that document just like you forged your way into your brother company. And now you are going to jail for trespassing, harassment, and federal document forgery. I am going to watch them put you in handcuffs and drag you out of this neighborhood. The knocking grew louder, followed by a stern voice demanding entry. Evelyn smiled a wide, terrifying smile. Open the door, Maya. Your ride is here. I reached for the brass handle and pulled the heavy oak door inward. The cool night air rushed in, accompanied by the harsh crackle of police radios. 4 uniformed officers stood on the wraparound porch, led by a tall detective in a sharp gray suit. He held a leather-bound notepad in one hand and looked past me into the crowded foyer. The rhythmic sweep of red and blue lights washed over the horrified faces of my aunts, uncles, and church elders. Evelyn immediately pushed her way to the front of the crowd, pointing a shaking manicured finger right at my chest. Officer. Thank God you are here, she cried, putting on her very best distressed Southern socialite performance. This woman broke into our home. She is trespassing. She brought forged legal documents trying to steal our property, and she has been harassing my family all night. Arrest her immediately before she hurts someone. The detective glanced at Evelyn, his expression completely unreadable. He looked down at his notepad and then stepped over the threshold, his heavy boots thudding loudly against the original hardwood floor. The uniformed officers followed, fanning out into the foyer to secure the exits. Aunt Shirley and the church elders shrank back against the floral wallpaper, clutching their pearls and murmuring panicked prayers. The detective walked right past me. He did not ask for my identification. He did not ask to see the deed. He did not even give me a second glance. He marched straight up to the ruined buffet table where my father and brother were standing, frozen in absolute shock. Thomas Williams and Marcus Williams, the detective, announced, his voice cutting through the heavy tension like a whip. You are both under arrest. 2 officers moved instantly. They grabbed Marcus by the arm, spinning him around and slamming him face down onto the mahogany dining table right next to the macaroni and cheese. The metallic click of steel handcuffs echoing in the dining room sounded louder than a gunshot. Thomas tried to pull away, his face flushing with indignant, righteous rage. "Get your hands off me!" he roared, wrestling against the officer, gripping his shoulder. "Do you know who I am? I am a respected businessman in this city. I am an elder at my church. There has been a terrible mistake. You are supposed to be arresting her." He jerked his head toward me, but the second officer simply forced his arms behind his back and secured the cuffs tightly around his wrists. Evelyn let out a blood-curdling scream. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, grabbing the detective by the sleeve of his gray suit. "You have the wrong people. My husband is a pillar of this community. My son is a brilliant CEO. That woman is the criminal. She faked a property deed. She set us up." I walked slowly into the center of the room, smoothing the lapels of my designer blazer. "I did not fake anything, Evelyn," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "The deed is completely real. I legally purchased the debt you defaulted on, but that is not why the police are here tonight." I turned to look at my father, who was now sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he struggled against the steel cuffs. "When I took majority control of Vanguard Tech last week, I realized the accounting books were a complete disaster," I explained, making sure my voice carried to every single relative in the room. "So I did what any responsible corporate owner would do. I ordered an immediate forensic audit by an independent firm, and what they found was absolutely fascinating." Marcus let out a pathetic whimpering sound, his knees buckling slightly as an officer hauled him upright. "It turns out Vanguard Tech was never actually developing revolutionary algorithms." I continued, locking eyes with Thomas. "It was just a giant piggy bank for your criminal activities. The auditors uncovered a massive network of shell companies, ghost employees, and offshore accounts. You and Marcus were creating fake vendor invoices and funneling millions of dollars of investor capital straight into private bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. You were committing federal wire fraud and massive tax evasion to cover your personal debts and Marcus' sports gambling addiction." Uncle Frank gasped out loud, leaning heavily against the grand staircase for support. The church elders looked at Thomas with pure, unadulterated disgust. The great patriarch, the man who had constantly lectured them all on morality and financial responsibility, was nothing but a common white-collar thief. He had stolen from his own investors to keep up the appearance of high society wealth. Evelyn staggered backward, as if she had been physically struck in the chest. "You called the police on your own blood!" she gasped, her eyes wild and frantic. I shook my head slowly, giving her a pitying look. "I did not call the local police for a petty trespassing dispute, Mom. The forensic auditors were legally obligated to report their findings to the authorities. The FBI is the one who coordinated this raid. They have been watching your offshore accounts all week, waiting for the exact right moment to execute the arrest warrants. I just provided them with the location of your little family dinner party." The detective nodded to his officers. "Read them their rights and get them in the cruisers." He turned to Thomas. "We will be executing search warrants on your corporate offices and your bank safety deposit boxes tonight. Let us go." Marcus completely broke down. The charismatic tech bro facade shattered into a million pieces. He started sobbing loudly, dragging his expensive leather shoes across the floor as the officers pulled him toward the front door. "Mom, do something!" He wailed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his pristine image in front of the entire extended family. "Please do not let them take me. I cannot go to federal prison. Call a lawyer, Mom. Fix this." Thomas kept his head down, thoroughly humiliated, unable to look any of his peers in the eye as he was marched out of his own house in handcuffs. The flashing red and blue lights outside cast long, harsh shadows across his face, highlighting every single line of his defeat. He was a broken, ruined man. Evelyn watched her golden child and her powerful husband being shoved aggressively into the back of a police cruiser. The reality of her situation crashed down on her all at once, crushing the breath out of her lungs. Her wealth was entirely gone. Her social status was permanently obliterated. Her historic house belonged to me. Her family was headed to federal prison for a very long time. She had absolutely nothing left to her name. Evelyn collapsed. She dropped straight to her knees on the expensive Persian rug, her royal blue dress pooling around her like spilled ink. She buried her face in her hands and let out a guttural, agonizing wail that shook the crystal chandelier hanging above us. It was the sound of a woman whose entire universe had just been vaporized. Then she slowly lifted her head. Her hands dropped to her sides. Her eyes locked onto me, and they were entirely devoid of sanity. They were black, empty voids of pure, venomous hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her voice tearing through her throat in a ragged, desperate scream. "You are not even a real Williams," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and silencing every single whisper in the room. "You hear me. You are nothing. You are a bastard child Thomas had with a maid." The word maid echoed off the crystal chandelier hanging above the ruined dining table. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room dared to take a single breath. The flashing blue and red lights from the police cruisers outside continued to sweep across the walls, but all the chaos of the arrests suddenly felt miles away. Every single pair of eyes in the room snapped directly to me. I stood completely still. My heart slammed against my ribs with the force of a sledgehammer, but I forced my facial expression to remain an unreadable mask of stone. Evelyn slowly pushed herself up from the floor. Her royal blue dress was rumpled and her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, but she had found her weapon. She looked around at the shocked faces of the church elders and the gaping aunts and uncles. She was a cornered animal, and she was using the only ammunition she had left to survive. "That is right," Evelyn spat, pointing her trembling finger at me again. "Thomas brought this stray into my home 30 years ago. I was forced to raise her out of the goodness of my Christian heart. I gave her my name. I fed her. I clothed her. I treated her like she was my own flesh and blood. And this is how she repays my boundless generosity. By bringing federal agents to my doorstep. By trying to steal Black generational wealth that rightfully belongs to my biological son." The uncles and aunties exchanged uncertain glances. The collective outrage that had been directed at Evelyn just moments ago began to waver. Evelyn knew exactly how to play this crowd. She knew how deeply this family valued their lineage and their hard-won legacy. "She is an outsider," Evelyn continued, her voice rising in a desperate theatrical crescendo. "She is the product of sin and betrayal. She infiltrated this family to tear us apart from the inside. She does not have a drop of true Williams loyalty in her veins. She is just a bitter, jealous bastard trying to destroy the legitimate heir to this family empire." Aunt Shirley clutched her pearl necklace, staring at me with a renewed sense of disgust. "Blood will always out," Aunt Shirley muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "You can dress up a stray, but you cannot wash away the deceit." I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I did not give Evelyn the satisfaction of watching me break down in front of the people who had despised me my entire life. I turned my head and looked out the large bay window. Thomas was standing by the open door of a police cruiser, his hands cuffed behind his back. I locked eyes with him through the glass. For a fraction of a second, the arrogant patriarch dropped his facade. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze, staring down at the pavement in absolute cowardice. He was not going to defend me. He never had. I turned back to Evelyn. I looked at her with pure glacial indifference. "You can keep the narrative, Evelyn," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "But I keep the house. Be out in 30 days. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, stepping past the federal agents swarming the porch. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my chin high until I reached the safety of my chauffeured town car. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, shutting out the noise of the flashing sirens, the adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. My hands began to shake violently. I leaned my head against the cool leather seat, closing my eyes as the driver pulled away from the curb. Evelyn's words echoed relentlessly in my mind. A bastard child. A maid. The accusation was designed to shatter me, but as my analytical mind took over, a massive, glaring flaw in Evelyn's story began to emerge. It was a flaw so massive, it completely unraveled her entire performance. Big Mama. Big Mama was the undisputed matriarch of the Williams family. She was a woman of fierce, uncompromising pride who valued her family bloodline above absolutely everything else. She was the one who had bought that historic home free and clear. If I was the product of an illicit affair with a maid, why did Big Mama love me so fiercely? Why did she spend her final years protecting me from Evelyn? Why did she explicitly bypass her own son to leave me her entire life savings for my college fund? Big Mama would never have handed the keys to her generational wealth to a bastard outsider while ignoring her true biological grandson. The math did not add up. The logic was completely broken. I did not go back to my penthouse to cry. I directed my driver straight to my corporate office. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I had Vance sitting across from my walnut desk. Vance was a former federal investigator who now ran the most ruthless private intelligence firm in Atlanta. He was expensive, discreet, and highly effective. I slid a blank check across the desk. I need birth records, hospital records, and historical tax filings from 35 years ago, I told him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I want every single scrap of paper related to Thomas and Evelyn Williams. And I need you to expedite a genetic genealogist. I pulled a sterile swab from a plastic tube, rubbed it aggressively against the inside of my cheek, and dropped it into a biohazard bag. Run my DNA against the national registries, I commanded. Cross-reference it with the extended Williams family tree. I want the absolute truth of my lineage, and I want it yesterday. For the next 4 days, I operated like a machine. I finalized the hostile takeover of Vanguard Tech, liquidating their remaining viable assets and transferring the proprietary algorithms under the Apex Holdings umbrella. I watched the local news as Thomas and Marcus were formally denied bail, facing a mountain of federal wire fraud and tax evasion charges. I processed the eviction notices for the historic house. I kept myself moving so I would not have to sit in the silence and wonder who I actually was. On Friday afternoon, Vance walked into my office. He did not say a word. He looked grim, but there was a distinct flash of triumph in his eyes. He sat down in the leather chair opposite my desk and dropped a thick manila folder right on top of my keyboard. I opened the file. Sitting right on top was a sealed, locked birth certificate from the state of Georgia dated 35 years ago. I secured the original, unredacted hospital records, Vance said, his rough voice filling the quiet office. And the genetic genealogist rushed the DNA panel. The results are completely undeniable. I stared at the name printed on the birth certificate. My mother was not a maid. My mother was a woman named Clara Hughes. She was Thomas Williams' first wife, a woman who died of severe complications just 3 days after giving birth to me. Thomas had married Evelyn a year later to help raise his infant daughter. I was a full-blooded, legitimate Williams. Then why did Evelyn lie, I asked, looking up at Vance. Why invent the story about the maid? Vance reached out and flipped to the second page in the folder. It was a DNA sequencing report. Because it is a classic misdirection, Vance replied, leaning back in his chair. Evelyn did not just lie, Maya. She projected her own sin onto you. We ran the genetic markers against the public databases. You are a 100% biological match to the Williams family tree. Vance tapped a thick, blunt finger against the DNA report. Marcus, on the other hand, is not. He does not share a single strand of DNA with Thomas Williams. Marcus is the affair baby. I sat in my leather chair staring at the DNA sequencing report. The sheer audacity of Evelyn's projection was staggering. She had spent my entire childhood treating me like a dirty secret, treating me like a stain on the pristine Williams family legacy. She had emotionally tortured a motherless child because every time she looked at me, she was reminded of her own infidelity. Marcus, the golden child, the heir apparent, the visionary CEO, was a complete biological fraud. I closed the manila folder and slid it toward the edge of my desk. Good work, Vance, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I need you to forward copies of these DNA results to the federal agents currently holding Thomas and Marcus. I want them to know exactly who they are dealing with. Vance nodded, standing up and adjusting his suit jacket. You have a target in mind for your next move, he asked. I grabbed my coat and my car keys. Yes, I do. I am going to pay a visit to the man who buried this secret. Arthur Sterling was the senior partner at Sterling and Hayes, one of the oldest and most prestigious law firms in downtown Atlanta. He had been Big Mama's personal attorney for decades, and he was the executor who managed her estate after she passed away. He was the one who had read the will that left the historic house to Thomas, and distributed the trust funds to Marcus, leaving me with virtually nothing. I had always known the math felt wrong, but I never had the ammunition to challenge a man of his stature. Today, I brought a bazooka. I walked straight past his shocked receptionist, ignoring her frantic protests, and shoved open the heavy mahogany door to his corner office. Arthur looked up from his computer, his face instantly contorting in outrage. Maya, he barked, standing up from his leather executive chair. You cannot just barge into my private office. My receptionist is calling security. I would tell her to hang up the phone, Arthur, I said, slamming the thick manila folder directly onto his polished desk. Unless you want the police to escort you out in handcuffs just like they did to Thomas and Marcus last night. Arthur froze. The color instantly drained from his face. He had clearly seen the morning news. The arrest of a prominent Atlanta businessman and his CEO's son was already dominating the local headlines. He slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes locked onto the folder. I opened it and spread the documents out across his desk. I displayed the locked birth certificate proving Clara Hughes was my mother. Then I placed the DNA report proving Marcus had zero biological connection to the Williams family right next to it. Finally, I dropped the forensic audit report showing the massive wire fraud Thomas and Marcus had committed using Vanguard tech accounts. The FBI is currently tearing through Vanguard's financial records, I said, leaning over the desk so I was inches from his face. They are tracing every single offshore wire transfer. How long do you think it will take them to trace the payments Thomas made to your private escrow accounts 15 years ago? Arthur swallowed hard, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. I do not know what you are talking about. I think you do, Arthur, I replied, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Big Mama was not stupid. She built an empire from the ground up. She valued loyalty and bloodline above absolutely everything else. If she knew Marcus was an affair baby, she would never have left him a dime. And looking at these DNA results, there is no way she did not know. You forged the will, Arthur. You helped Thomas and Evelyn steal my entire inheritance. He tried to maintain his arrogant lawyer facade, but his hands were trembling visibly against the armrests of his chair. You have no proof of that. The will submitted to probate was authenticated. It was authenticated by a corrupt lawyer who accepted a massive bribe, I countered. But you are a cautious man, Arthur. You are a coward who always keeps a backup plan. You would never destroy the original document. You kept it as leverage against Thomas just in case he ever tried to turn on you. Hand it over, right now. If I give you that document, it violates attorney-client privilege, he stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. If you do not give me that document, I will personally hand this folder to the federal prosecutor handling my family's wire fraud case, I shot back. I will have you disbarred, indicted, and thrown into a federal penitentiary before dinner. Hand over the real will, Arthur. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The fight completely left his body. He was an old man who cared entirely too much about his country club memberships to survive a prison sentence. He slowly stood up, his knees shaking, and walked over to a large painting hanging on the far wall. He swung the frame open, revealing a heavy steel wall safe. He dialed the combination, his hands shaking so badly he had to restart twice. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. He walked back to the desk and dropped it in front of me like it was burning his fingers. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the crisp parchment paper. It was written in Big Mama's familiar, elegant handwriting. Her signature was flawless at the bottom. I read the paragraphs quickly, my chest tightening with a profound sense of vindication. Big Mama had known everything. She had hired her own private investigators decades ago. She detailed Evelyn's infidelity and Marcus's true parentage with absolute precision. She stated clearly that Thomas was a weak fool for allowing another man's child to carry the Williams name. And right there on the second page was the absolute truth. She left 100% of her estate, her investments, the historic house, and the generational trust funds entirely to me. I was her sole legal heir. They blackmailed me. Arthur whispered, sinking into his chair. Thomas threatened to ruin my firm. Evelyn threatened to expose a personal indiscretion of mine. They promised me a percentage of the estate if I just altered the beneficiary names. You make me sick, I said, sliding the real will into my designer bag. You sold out the only woman who ever trusted you. I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, leaving him to drown in his own panic. I stepped into my chauffeured car, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure. The truth was finally in my hands. The generational wealth had always been mine. The house had always been mine. I had spent my entire life believing I was the outcast when in reality, I was the only true heir. I arrived back at my secure penthouse building as the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the Atlanta skyline. I took the private elevator up to the top floor, exhausted but triumphant. I walked into my massive kitchen and placed the real will, the DNA results, and the Vanguard Tech hard drive directly onto the marble island. I poured myself a large glass of red wine, ready to finally enjoy the silence. My phone buzzed sharply against the marble counter. It was an alert from my building's high-security system. I picked up the phone and opened the live camera feed for my private hallway. My heart skipped a beat. Marcus was stepping out of the elevator. He had made bail. The federal judge must have allowed a bond secured by some hidden offshore account my auditors had not frozen yet. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit from the night before, but his face was twisted into a mask of pure, violent desperation. And walking right behind him was Chloe. She had realized he still had access to bail money. She had done the math and realized he might still have millions stashed away in an untouchable account, so she had immediately crawled right back to him. They were both standing outside my heavy, reinforced penthouse door. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy steel crowbar, gripping it tightly in his right hand. They had come to destroy the evidence. They thought I was out celebrating. They had absolutely no idea I was standing just 10 feet away, watching them on the monitors, holding a glass of wine and waiting for them to make their final fatal mistake. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet Sauvignon, watching the high-definition security monitor as Marcus wedged the heavy steel crowbar into the seam of my front door. He was sweating profusely, his expensive suit jacket hanging loosely over his frame, and his tie pulled completely undone. Chloe stood directly behind him, clutching a designer handbag, shivering in the cool, air-conditioned hallway. They were completely pathetic. My penthouse door was reinforced solid-core steel designed to withstand a battering ram. A standard crowbar was never going to open it. But I did not want them stuck in the hallway. I wanted them inside. I wanted them caught red-handed committing federal felonies on my property. I set my wine glass down on the marble island and pulled up the smart home control panel on my tablet. With a single tap, I disabled the magnetic deadbolt. The heavy door clicked loudly, echoing in the quiet hallway. Marcus practically fell forward as the door swung open, believing his brute force had actually worked. He stumbled into my foyer, dragging Chloe in right behind him. They moved through the darkness of my penthouse like desperate rats scurrying across a sinking ship. The moonlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floors. "We need the original will and the flash drives," Marcus hissed, his voice tight with panic, as he clicked on a small tactical flashlight. "If we destroy the will Arthur gave her and smash those audit drives, the feds have no paper trail. Thomas can dispute the digital copies in court, and we can salvage the accounts. Check the office." Chloe did not argue. Her eyes were wide with frantic greed. She had crawled back to a man she despised simply because he might still have access to hidden millions, and she was willing to risk everything to get her cut. She sprinted toward my home office, her expensive stiletto heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. I watched through the internal security cameras, perfectly safe behind the mirrored glass of my adjacent observation room. I watched as they tore my meticulously organized workspace apart. Chloe yanked open desk drawers, dumping client files and financial folders onto the expensive Persian rug. She ripped the cushions off the leather seating, tearing at the seams, looking for hidden compartments. Marcus swept his flashlight over the bookshelves, knocking over framed photos, crystal awards, and expensive art pieces in his frantic search. They were completely unhinged, destroying everything in their path. They were so blinded by their own panic that they did not even notice the tiny red recording lights blinking from the corners of the ceiling, capturing every single second of their crime in glorious high definition. There Marcus barked, his flashlight beam landing on the recessed wall behind my desk. I had intentionally left the sliding mahogany panel slightly ajar, exposing the digital wall safe hidden behind it. Marcus shoved Chloe out of the way and dropped to his knees in front of the keypad. He let out a harsh, breathless laugh. "It is a standard Vanguard tech security model," he muttered, his fingers flying across the glowing numbers. "She never updated the firmware when she took over the company. I built this security protocol myself. I know the factory backdoor codes." He punched in a master override sequence he had designed years ago. He actually thought he was outsmarting me. He thought his brilliant tech mind was saving him from federal prison. The green light flashed on the panel, and the heavy steel door clicked open. A victorious, manic grin spread across his sweating face. "I got it, Chloe," he gasped, reaching his trembling hand into the dark cavity of the safe. "We are saved." He pulled out a thick red folder, identical to the one I had taken from Arthur Sterling just hours earlier. Chloe let out a breathless sob of relief, clutching his shoulder tightly. "Open it," she pleaded, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "Make sure the drives are in there and burn the paper right now." Marcus ripped the flap open, pulling out the contents hidden inside. He shined his tactical flashlight directly onto the page, expecting to see Big Mama authentic signature and the damning Vanguard Tech audit drives. His victorious grin instantly vanished. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. There was no legal jargon on the paper. There was no signature from Big Mama. There were no offshore account routing numbers, and there were certainly no flash drives. It was just a single piece of thick stationery paper with a sentence scrawled across it in my bold black handwriting. "Smile for the hidden cameras, Marcus." Before Marcus could even process the words, the penthouse was flooded with blinding artificial light. Every single overhead bulb snapped on simultaneously, illuminating the absolute destruction they had caused. Marcus dropped the paper, stumbling backward and crashing into the ruined desk. I was standing in the doorway of the office, flanked by my private security team and 4 armed Atlanta police officers. I held my wine glass in one hand, looking at the two of them with absolute total disgust. "You really are predictable, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You broke into a secured residence while out on federal bail to destroy evidence of your own wire fraud. You just handed the prosecutor a guaranteed conviction on a silver platter." Chloe let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute terror. She spun around, attempting to sprint past the officers toward the hallway. But in her frantic panic, she misjudged her footing. Her expensive stiletto heel caught the edge of the thick Persian rug she had just ruined. She twisted her ankle violently, letting out a loud yelp as she crashed face first onto the hard wooden floor, her designer bag spilling useless cosmetics everywhere. The officers moved instantly. They hauled Marcus to his feet, slamming his wrists into handcuffs for the second time in 24 hours. He did not even fight back. He just stared at the handwritten note on the floor, completely defeated. Another officer pulled a sobbing, frantic Chloe up from the floor, securing her wrists tightly behind her back as she wailed about her ankle. Marcus Williams and Chloe Williams, the lead officer, announced, reading them their rights as they were shoved toward the door. "You are both under arrest for breaking and entering, destruction of private property, and corporate espionage." The heavy steel door clicked shut behind the officers, leaving my penthouse in absolute silence. I looked down at the ruined Persian rug and the scattered files, taking a long sip of my Cabernet. They had walked right into the trap. The corporate espionage charges would carry a mandatory federal sentence. With the undeniable video evidence recorded on my security system, Marcus and Chloe were entirely finished. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and went to sleep, feeling a profound sense of peace that I had not experienced in over 30 years. The next morning, the atmosphere at Apex Holdings was electric. The news of the Vanguard Tech arrests had completely dominated the morning financial networks. The entire business world was buzzing with the revelation that Thomas and Marcus Williams, the supposed titans of Atlanta Tech, were nothing but common fraudsters facing decades in federal prison. I walked into the soaring glass and steel lobby of my corporate headquarters, wearing a pristine white tailored suit, feeling the respectful and awestruck gazes of my employees. I was just approaching the private executive elevator when a shrill, frantic voice echoed across the polished marble floor. Maya, Maya, please, you have to listen to me. I turned around. The security guards at the front desk were actively trying to restrain a woman who was frantically shoving against their arms. It took me a full 5 seconds to realize the woman was Evelyn, the formidable matriarch of the Williams family. The woman who had spent my entire life terrorizing me over improper table settings and unbranded shoes was completely unrecognizable. Her usually immaculate hair was a tangled, chaotic mess. Her silk blouse was heavily wrinkled and stained with spilled coffee. She looked like she had spent the entire night sitting on a hard wooden bench in a police precinct. She shoved past a heavily built security guard, her expensive handbag swinging wildly, and threw herself across the expansive lobby. Miss Williams, the lead guard said, stepping quickly in front of me with his hand resting firmly on his radio. She bypassed the visitor checkpoint. Should I call the police and have her removed? I raised a single hand, stopping him. No, let her speak, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I want everyone to hear this. Evelyn did not just walk up to me, she collapsed. She dropped to her knees right in the middle of the corporate lobby, surrounded by dozens of my top executives, financial analysts, and assistants. The entire floor went dead silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the clicking of a dozen smartphones as my employees subtly started recording the spectacle. You have to stop this, Evelyn wailed, grabbing the hem of my white trousers. Her hands were shaking violently, leaving faint smudges of dirt on the pristine fabric. They denied Thomas bail. They denied Marcus bail. The federal prosecutors are freezing every single account we have. The bank is foreclosing on the historic house today, Maya. They are literally putting our antique furniture out on the street. You have the money. You have Big Mama Trust Fund. You have to save us. I looked down at the woman who had made my childhood a living hell. She was kneeling on the cold marble floor, stripping away every single ounce of her refined Southern belle pride, begging for scraps from the bastard child she had tried to destroy. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no anger, just a cold, clinical observation of a parasite that had finally run out of hosts. You brought this on yourselves, Evelyn, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent lobby. You and Thomas built an empire on lies and stolen money. I am just the person who finally handed the auditors the flashlight. Evelyn's face turned a blotchy, furious red as she scrambled to justify her demands. She looked around at the watching employees, trying to leverage public guilt. I am your mother, Evelyn screamed, her voice echoing off the high glass walls. I raised you. I took you in when you were a motherless infant. I fed you. I clothed you. I gave you a roof over your head. You owe me your life. You owe this family your loyalty. I stepped backward, forcing her to release my trousers. I looked at her with pure glacial indifference. You fed me Marcus leftovers, I replied, my tone dropping to a chilling whisper that somehow resonated louder than her screams. You clothed me in Chloe discarded fast fashion after she wore it once to your country club events. You made me sleep in the unheated attic room while your fake biological son had the master suite. You hid my real mother from me. You stole my inheritance. You never loved me, Evelyn. You only loved the control you thought you had over me. Evelyn choked on a dry sob, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The remaining fight completely drained out of her body. She realized the manipulation was not working. The audience was not taking her side. My employees were looking at her with absolute disgust. Please, Maya, she begged, pressing her hands together in a pathetic prayer. I have absolutely nothing left. My credit cards are declining. The lawyers will not even take my phone calls without a retainer. I cannot even afford a taxi back to the federal courthouse to see my son. Please, show some mercy. I stared at her, taking in the absolute pathetic reality of her ultimate downfall. She had spent her entire life worshiping money and status, and now she was begging for loose change on the floor of my corporate building. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I held it between my fingers for a moment, letting her desperate eyes lock onto the green paper. Then I let it flutter from my hand, dropping right onto the marble floor next to her bruised knees. Here, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You gave me exactly $20 when you kicked me out of the house in the freezing rain at 18 years old. I am returning the favor. Take a bus. Evelyn stared down at the crumpled $20 bill resting on the cold marble floor. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I did not wait for her to find her voice. I turned my back on her and stepped into the private executive elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. The doors slid shut, severing my final tie to the woman who had tormented me for decades. 6 months later, the sprawling federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was packed to absolute capacity. The high-profile collapse of Vanguard Tech had drawn every major news outlet in the state. I sat perfectly still in the front row of the gallery, watching the proceedings with clinical detachment. Thomas and Marcus sat at the defense table wearing ill-fitting suits that lacked their usual tailored elegance. Despite facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion, they both maintained a sickeningly arrogant posture. They had officially pleaded not guilty, completely convinced their high-priced defense team could manipulate the jury. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat with a separate legal counsel. She was not just there to support her fraudulent husband and son. She had boldly filed a civil suit against me, attempting to run it concurrently with the criminal proceedings. Her claim was completely laughable. She accused me of elder abuse, asserting that I had coerced Big Mama into signing over the historic family home and the generational trust. She wanted the deed invalidated and the assets returned to the so-called rightful heirs. The federal prosecutor, a sharp woman with piercing brown eyes, called me to the stand on the third day of the trial. I swore the oath and took my seat, adjusting the microphone. Evelyn, defense attorney, immediately stood up, seizing the opportunity to cross-examine me regarding the civil dispute. Miss Williams, the attorney, began, his voice dripping with condescension. You expect this court to believe that your elderly grandmother bypassed her own biological son and grandson to leave a multi-million-dollar estate to you alone, a woman who was entirely estranged from the family. Is it not true that you isolated her during her final months to manipulate her assets? I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the wooden partition. I did not isolate her, I replied, my voice echoing clearly through the massive courtroom. I protected her from the people currently sitting at the defense table, and she did not bypass her biological grandson. She bypassed a biological fraud. The courtroom erupted into sudden whispers. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. I pulled a thick-bound dossier from my leather briefcase and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge and the opposing counsel. Let us review the actual financial history of this family, I said, directing my gaze at Thomas. 15 years ago, Big Mama executed her final will and testament. She left her entire estate to me. My father, Thomas Williams, discovered this. He and Evelyn blackmailed Arthur Sterling, the family attorney, into destroying the original document and forging a new one that named Marcus as the primary beneficiary. Evelyn bolted upright in her seat. Lies, she screamed, her face turning a mottled shade of red. She is a liar. She faked those papers. Order, the judge bellowed, glaring down at Evelyn. One more outburst, Mrs. Williams, and you will be removed from this courtroom. The prosecutor stepped forward, approaching the witness stand. Miss Williams, can you verify the authenticity of this original will? I nodded, pulling the yellowed parchment paper from my briefcase. This is the original document recovered directly from Arthur Sterling private wall safe. It bears Big Mama authentic signature. But more importantly, it contains a sworn addendum written in her own hand. I looked directly at Thomas, who was suddenly gripping the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning white. Big Mama hired private investigators 30 years ago, I explained, my voice mercilessly steady. She knew exactly what Evelyn was doing behind closed doors. She explicitly stated in this addendum that she was leaving nothing to Marcus because Marcus does not possess a single drop of William's blood. The entire gallery gasped collectively. Reporters scrambled to type on their laptops. Evelyn, defense attorney, sputtered, waving his hands. Objection. This is baseless hearsay. I handed the next document to the bailiff. This is a court-ordered genetic sequence, I stated calmly. It cross-references Marcus DNA with the national registries and the established Williams family tree. The probability of Marcus being related to Thomas Williams is absolute zero. Evelyn had an affair. Marcus is the product of that affair. Big Mama knew it, and that is exactly why she left the generational wealth to me. I am the only legitimate heir. I watched the color drain completely out of Thomas' face. He slowly turned his head to look at Evelyn. The proud, arrogant patriarch who had spent his entire life preaching about his bloodline and his legacy was staring at his wife in sheer, unadulterated horror. Evelyn shrank back into her chair, covering her face with trembling hands. The grand illusion of her perfect marriage was entirely obliterated on the public record. I did not stop there. I turned my attention back to the prosecutor. Furthermore, I have provided the court with the complete forensic audit of Vanguard Tech. The funds Thomas and Marcus embezzled from their investors were systematically funneled into offshore accounts to cover Marcus' massive sports gambling debts. Debts he incurred trying to live up to a false billionaire lifestyle. The defense table was in absolute shambles. Marcus had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Thomas looked like he was having a physical medical emergency, clutching his chest as he stared vacantly at the DNA report projected on the court monitors. The judge cleared his throat, the sound echoing sharply in the tense room. "Thank you, Miss Williams. You may step down." I walked back to my seat in the gallery, feeling the weight of the room shift entirely. I had surgically dismantled their financial history, their legal claims, and their toxic family mythology in less than 20 minutes. But the prosecution was not finished. The prosecutor stood tall, adjusting her glasses. "The state calls Chloe Williams to the stand." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Chloe walked down the center aisle wearing a drab gray pantsuit that looked entirely foreign on her usually glamorous frame. Her designer heels were gone, replaced by sensible flat shoes. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, refusing to look at Marcus as she took the oath and sat in the witness box. Chloe had done the math. Facing multiple felony charges for corporate espionage and breaking and entering, she had taken the only life raft the federal government offered her. She had accepted a full plea deal. In exchange for immunity from prison time, she had agreed to become a state witness. Mrs. Williams, the prosecutor, began approaching the stand. "You were married to Marcus Williams for 5 years. Can you describe the nature of Vanguard Tech business operations during that time?" Chloe gripped the microphone, her knuckles white. "There were no business operations," she said, her voice trembling slightly before hardening into absolute resolve. "It was all a front. Marcus told me years ago that the algorithm was a complete failure. He and Thomas spent every single day fabricating investor reports to secure more funding." Marcus shot up out of his chair, his face twisted in fury. "You treacherous snake!" he yelled, lunging toward the stand before 2 federal marshals slammed him back down by his shoulders. Chloe flinched, but she did not stop talking. She leaned into the microphone, ready to save herself by burning them to the ground. "They stole millions," she testified, "and they laughed about it." Evelyn used to sit in the dining room and mock the investors, calling them gullible fools. She used to make explicitly racist remarks about her own church members, bragging that she was untouchable because she was lighter-skinned and had better connections. Evelyn let out a muffled shriek, burying her face in her legal team paperwork. Chloe continued spilling every toxic, illegal secret they had ever uttered behind closed doors. She detailed the offshore accounts, the fake vendor invoices, the bribes paid to local officials. She completely incinerated the last remaining shreds of the Williams family reputation, leaving absolutely nothing but scorched earth behind her. The silence that followed Chloe's testimony was absolute and suffocating. The jury members stared at the defense table with undisguised contempt. Thomas stared straight ahead, his face gray and hollow, while Marcus practically hyperventilated into his hands. Evelyn sat frozen at the plaintiff table, her perfectly styled hair trembling slightly as the gravity of the situation finally crushed the air from her lungs. Judge Peterson adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents spread across his massive oak desk. He did not look amused. He addressed the civil suit first, staring directly at Evelyn and her highly paid attorney. "Mrs. Williams," the judge began, his voice echoing sharply in the cavernous room, "you brought a civil suit against Maya Williams, claiming elder abuse and fraud regarding the estate of the late matriarch. Not only has this court seen irrefutable proof that the authentic will was legally executed, But the financial records presented during cross-examination have revealed a highly disturbing pattern of your own financial misconduct. Evelyn swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge of the table. The forensic audit clearly traces the initial seed money for Marcus offshore gambling accounts back 15 years. The judge continued, his tone laced with absolute disgust. The exact date corresponds with a sudden, unauthorized withdrawal of $150,000 from a custodial college fund belonging to Maya Williams, a fund you managed. You did not just forge a will to steal her future inheritance. You actively stole her educational trust to fund your illegitimate son. Evelyn tried to stand, her mouth opening to object, but her lawyer immediately pulled her back down. "I am dismissing your civil suit with prejudice," Judge Peterson declared, striking his gavel. "Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay immediate full restitution of the stolen $150,000 to Maya Williams, along with 15 years of compounded interest. Given the current freeze on your assets, you will be forced to liquidate your personal property to meet this judgment." Evelyn let out a strangled gasp. Her eyes rolled back into her head and her knees buckled. She collapsed sideways into her attorney chair, her designer purse spilling onto the floor. But the judge was not finished. He turned his attention to the criminal defense table where Thomas and Marcus sat rigid with terror. The jury foreman stood up and handed the verdict sheet to the bailiff. The reading took less than 2 minutes, but it destroyed a 30-year legacy. Guilty on all counts of federal wire fraud, guilty on all counts of embezzlement, guilty on all counts of tax evasion. Thomas and Marcus Williams. Judge Peterson commanded, his voice ringing with absolute finality. You used a corporate entity to orchestrate a massive financial scheme, defrauding investors and stealing millions to fund a lavish lifestyle. Your complete lack of remorse and attempt to destroy the person who uncovered your crimes shows a staggering level of arrogance. I sentence you both to 10 years in federal prison. There will be no possibility of early parole. The heavy thud of this gavel sealed their fate. 2 federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Thomas and Marcus by the arms and forcing them to their feet. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed sharply. Marcus began to openly sob, dragging his feet as the marshals hauled him toward the side door. Thomas did not look at his wife. He did not look at his son. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, utterly stripped of his power, his dignity, and his freedom. In the gallery, the reaction was immediate and brutal. The high society friends Evelyn had spent decades trying to impress, the very same wealthy socialites who had attended her lavish charity gala, were sitting in the back rows. They were not offering sympathy. They were actively whispering, pointing, and holding up their smartphones. The flash of cameras illuminated Evelyn's humiliated face as she slowly pushed herself up from the floor. She looked toward the gallery, seeking a friendly face, a sympathetic nod. Instead, she met the cold, judging stares of the elite circle she had worshipped. Women she had gossiped with over champagne were now capturing her destruction for their private group chats. Her social ruin was absolute and permanent. She was a pariah, a fraud, and a convicted thief. She had absolutely nothing and no one left. I stood up from my seat in the front row, smoothing the lapels of my tailored suit. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the wreckage of the Williams family behind me. The marble hallway outside the courtroom was quiet, cool, and blessedly empty. I walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. As I turned the corner, I saw her. Chloe was standing near the elevators, pulling her designer trench coat over her gray pantsuit. She looked up as I approached, a smug, victorious smile spreading across her face. She had done exactly what she set out to do. She had burned her husband to the ground, secured her federal immunity deal, and walked away without a single day of prison time. She thought she was the smartest person in the building. "Well, Maya," Chloe said, adjusting her collar with a self-satisfied smirk. "It looks like we both got what we wanted. Thomas and Marcus are locked away, and I get a clean slate. I guess you should thank me for testifying." I stopped a few feet away from her. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I held it out to her, my expression completely blank. You did not actually think the federal government was the only entity doing an audit, did you, Chloe? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Chloe's smug smile faltered slightly. She hesitated before reaching out and taking the envelope. What is this? I bought Vanguard Tech debt. I reminded her, stepping closer so she could hear every single word clearly. I own the company, which means I own the corporate expense accounts you used while serving as Marcus Vice President of Marketing. You received immunity for the wire fraud, but you forgot about the corporate funds you embezzled to buy your private condo in Miami. Chloe's face drained of all color. She ripped open the envelope. Inside were dozens of bank statements, routing numbers, and forged expense reports bearing her exact signature. The feds gave you a clean slate, I said, turning toward the elevator. But I am filing a private civil suit for corporate theft tomorrow morning. You owe my company $2 million, Chloe. Enjoy your freedom while you spend the rest of your life working a minimum wage job to pay me back. Chloe stared at the bank statements in her hand, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for a way out. The sheer arrogance that had defined her entire existence was cracking, but she was nothing if not a survivor. She forced a strained laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder and stepping toward me with a sickeningly sweet smile. She actually thought she could charm her way out of a federal crime. Come on, Maya, Chloe said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. You do not really want to drag this out in civil court. We made a good team in there today. I kept my freedom, and you got your revenge on Evelyn and Marcus. We both won. Let us just call it even and go our separate ways. I can even give you access to Marcus' personal client list. We can help each other. I stopped with my hand hovering over the elevator call button. I turned slowly to face her and let out a genuine sharp laugh that echoed down the empty marble hallway. It was the funniest thing I had heard all day. You think we are on a team? I asked, my tone dropping to a lethal calm. You think because you saved your own skin by throwing your husband to the wolves that you are somehow my equal? Look deeper into the envelope, Chloe. The $2 million for the Miami condo is just the warm-up. Chloe frowned, pulling a thick stack of stapled legal documents from the back of the envelope. Her eyes darted back and forth across the top page, and the remaining color completely drained from her face. Her hands began to shake so violently that the heavy stationery rattled in the quiet corridor. You see, Chloe's state immunity is a wonderful thing, I explained, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look me in the eye. State immunity protects you from criminal charges. It keeps you out of a federal penitentiary. It does not, however, protect you from civil liability. What is this? She breathed, her voice barely a squeak. That is a civil lawsuit filed by the new ownership of Vanguard Tech, I replied casually, checking my pristine manicure. We are suing you for $10 million for corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and egregious violations of your non-disclosure agreements. You cannot do this, she gasped, clutching the papers to her chest. I testified for the prosecution. I helped the government. I told them everything they wanted to know. You helped yourself, I corrected her sharply. And in the process, you openly admitted under oath on the public record that you knowingly participated in stealing trade secrets. You confessed to selling Vanguard Tech proprietary data to rival firms just to fund your excessive shopping habits. You handed me a legally binding confession. You literally did my lawyers' jobs for them. A civil judge is going to look at the transcript of your testimony from today and grant a summary judgment in my favor before lunchtime tomorrow. Chloe stumbled backward, her shoulders hitting the cool marble wall of the courthouse. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she gripped the documents. My lawyers will fight this, she stammered. I will countersue. I will drag you through discovery for years. With what money, Chloe? I asked, tilting my head in mock sympathy. The federal government just seized every single joint account you shared with Marcus. Your personal accounts are frozen pending the embezzlement investigation. Your platinum credit cards have been declining since Tuesday. You cannot afford a cup of coffee right now, let alone a corporate defense attorney. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked wildly around the empty hallway as if hoping a judge would suddenly step out and save her. Even if you could somehow scrounge up a desperate public defender, you are completely radioactive. I continued surgically dismantling her remaining hopes. You just spent 2 hours on a witness stand singing like a canary and throwing your own family under the bus. Do you really think any corporate executive in this country is ever going to hire you? You are an admitted fraudster and a known rat. The high society women you used to drink champagne with will not even let you clean their swimming pools. You are completely unemployable. Tears finally spilled over her perfectly contoured cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. But I have nothing. She sobbed, sliding slowly down the wall until she was crouching on the floor. If you take this to court, I will be bankrupt. I will be on the street. I have absolutely nothing left, Maya. I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of justice settling into my bones. I remembered being 18 years old, standing in the freezing rain, while Chloe stood on the porch of the historic house, wearing my late mother's vintage coat, laughing as Evelyn threw a $20 bill at my feet. I remembered the years of subtle insults, the discarded fast fashion hand-me-downs, the constant reminders that I was nothing but dirt beneath her expensive designer heels. She had reveled in my misery and feasted on money that rightfully belonged to me. "You are exactly where you belong," I said, my voice devoid of any pity. "You are bankrupt. You are destitute. You are a complete nobody." The elevator arrived with a soft chime, the polished steel doors sliding open to reveal the empty car. I stepped inside, turning to look at Chloe one last time, as she sat weeping on the courthouse floor, clutching a $10 million lawsuit she could never afford to pay. The facade of the untouchable wealthy socialite had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a broken, pathetic shell of a woman. I pressed the button for the lobby. "You should probably learn how to use the side entrance now." "Chloe?" I whispered, my voice carrying perfectly across the distance just as the heavy doors began to close. "It is where the help goes." The elevator doors sealed shut, cutting off the sight of Chloe crumbling on the marble floor. I watched the digital floor indicator flash as I descended to the lobby, feeling lighter than air. The trap had snapped shut on every single rat that had infested my life. But there was still one final piece of business left to attend to. 30 days later, I drove my black town car up the winding oak-lined driveway of Big Mama Historic Estate. The sprawling brick mansion stood exactly as it had for generations, imposing and steeped in Southern wealth. But the scene playing out on the front lawn was a stark departure from the glamorous garden parties Evelyn used to host. There were no valet drivers today. There were no caterers carrying trays of crystal champagne flutes. Instead, a battered yellow moving truck was parked haphazardly on the manicured grass. The logo on the side belonged to a discount budget moving company. I parked and stepped out into the humid morning air. My heels crunched against the gravel path as I approached the grand double doors, which had been propped wide open. Inside the foyer, the echoing silence of the massive house was punctuated by the grunts of two sweaty movers hauling a cheap particle board dresser down the sweeping mahogany staircase. Because the court had ordered Evelyn to pay back the $150,000 she stole from my college fund, plus 15 years of compounded interest. Her assets had been aggressively liquidated. The courts had seized the antique Persian rugs, the imported Italian leather sofas, the crystal chandeliers, and every single piece of fine art she had purchased with stolen Vanguard tech money. I walked into the main living room. The echo of my footsteps felt different now. The space was completely stripped bare of Evelyn toxic pretension. Standing in the center of the empty room was Evelyn herself. She was wearing a faded tracksuit, taping up a cardboard box with a loud, abrasive ripping sound. Her meticulously maintained appearance was entirely gone. Her hair lacked its usual expensive salon blowout, and the dark bags under her eyes betrayed a month of sleepless nights. She was moving to a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a notorious neighborhood on the far east side of the city. It was a place with barred windows and peeling paint. A place she would have once refused to even drive past. She froze when she heard my footsteps. She slowly stood up, dropping the roll of packing tape onto the floor. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the empty room. "Are you here to gloat?" she asked, her voice raspy and thin, completely stripped of its usual commanding arrogance. "Could you not just let me leave in peace?" I am here to oversee the transition of my property. Evelyn, I replied, folding my arms across my chest. The 30-day eviction notice expired at noon. I am just ensuring you are out of my house on schedule. Evelyn's face twisted with a sudden desperate fury. She looked around the cavernous empty room, her eyes welling with bitter, angry tears. She refused to accept her own culpability. In her twisted mind, she was still the victim of a cruel, ungrateful child. You destroyed this family, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You took my husband. You put my son in a cage. You drove Chloe to the brink of insanity, and now you are throwing me out onto the street like trash. We gave you a name. We gave you a home. You destroyed everything we built. I did not flinch. I watched as the two discount movers lumbered past us carrying a stained, cheap floral sofa toward the front door. It was the last piece of furniture Evelyn had been allowed to keep. It looked completely absurd and pathetic moving through the grand foyer of Big Mama Historic Home. I looked back at Evelyn feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure. No, Evelyn. I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. I did not destroy anything. I just stopped funding the illusion. She flinched as if I had physically struck her. Thomas and Marcus destroyed themselves with their own greed. I continued stepping closer to her, forcing her to hear every word. Chloe destroyed herself the moment she decided to commit corporate espionage to fund her shoe collection. And you destroyed yourself the day you decided to steal from a child to protect a lie. This family was rotting from the inside out long before I ever pulled the financial records. You built a house of cards on a foundation of stolen money and cruelty. I just opened the window and let the wind blow it down. Evelyn's chest heaved, but she had absolutely no argument left. The evidence was irrefutable. The prison sentences were handed down. The bankruptcy was finalized. She picked up her cardboard box, her knuckles white, and walked past me without another word. I followed her to the front door, watching as she descended the brick steps and climbed into the passenger seat of the rusted moving truck. She did not look back as the truck sputtered to life and rolled down the driveway, belching gray exhaust smoke into the pristine morning air. She was gone. The parasite had finally been completely excised. A sleek white van pulled into the driveway just as the moving truck disappeared onto the main road. Two men in uniform stepped out carrying heavy metal toolboxes. I had hired the best locksmiths in Atlanta. Miss Williams, one of them asked, approaching the porch. We are here to rekey the estate. I stepped back, holding the front door open. Go ahead, I told them. Every door, every window, every gate. As the men went to work dismantling the old hardware, I turned and walked back into the center of the house. I walked through the grand dining room where I had been humiliated and forced to eat in silence. I walked past the study where Thomas had threatened me. I walked up the stairs past the luxurious master suite that Marcus had claimed and down the hall to the tiny cramped attic room where I had spent my teenage years freezing and alone. The house was completely silent, but it no longer felt oppressive. The suffocating atmosphere of Evelyn judgment and Thomas cruelty had vanished entirely. The air felt clean and breathable. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the sharp metallic clicks of the new deadbolts being installed on the front doors. With every click, I felt the crushing, suffocating weight of generational trauma finally lifting off my shoulders. The cycle of abuse was broken. Big Mama True legacy was secure. The estate, the company, and the future were finally completely mine. 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind swept through the open French doors of Big Mama Historic Estate, but the atmosphere inside was entirely unrecognizable from the suffocating toxic tension of my childhood. I had spent the last half-year completely purging the mansion of every single trace of Evelyn and Thomas. The oppressive dark mahogany panels had been stripped and lightened. The gaudy imported Italian chandeliers that Evelyn had purchased with stolen money were auctioned off and replaced by brilliant modern fixtures. The restrictive formal sitting rooms where I had once been forbidden to sit were knocked down to create expansive collaborative workspaces. The house was finally breathing again, I stood at the top of the grand staircase looking down at the magnificent gala unfolding in the foyer and spilling out onto the wraparound porch. This was not one of Evelyn's pathetic high society gatherings filled with stuck-up corporate elites sipping champagne and trading hollow fake pleasantries. This was a gathering of raw, undeniable brilliance. The room was packed to the brim with fiercely intelligent young black women. They were software engineers, financial analysts, marketing strategists, and startup founders. They were pitching ideas, exchanging business plans, and building actual empires right in my living room. This was the official launch party for the Williams Foundation for Young Black Female Entrepreneurs. I walked slowly down the staircase, the heavy silk of my emerald green evening gown rustling softly against the hardwood steps. I made my way to the lucite podium set up directly in front of the massive stone fireplace. As I stepped up to the microphone, the energetic chatter immediately died down, replaced by an expectant and deeply supportive silence. I looked out at the faces looking back at me. In the front row sat a few of my aunts and uncles, the rare handful of relatives who had actually done the hard work of making amends. When Thomas and Marcus were sentenced, they had not come to me begging for handouts. They had come with genuine tearful apologies for their years of silence and complicity in Evelyn's reign of terror. They had acknowledged their cowardice, and I had allowed them back into the fold strictly on my own terms. Welcome, everyone, I began, my voice projecting clearly through the hidden speakers. Tonight, we officially open the doors to this foundation. This house has stood on this ground for generations. It was built with blood, sweat, and a vision of generational wealth by a woman who refused to accept the limitations the world placed on her. But for a very long time, that vision was corrupted. It was poisoned by greed, exclusivity, and a desperate, pathetic need for control. I gripped the edges of the podium, looking around the grand room that had once served as my personal prison. I grew up within these walls, but I was never allowed to be part of the family. I continued my tone steady and completely unapologetic. I was treated like an unwanted burden, a dirty secret to be hidden away. I was forced to sleep in an unheated attic room. I was fed Marcus leftovers. I was clothed in Chloe discarded fast fashion. I was told repeatedly in both words and actions that I was nothing more than the help. I was expected to fade into the background and quietly watch while fraudsters squandered the legacy my grandmother built. They expected me to take the abuse and stay silent. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a fraction of a second. The entire crowd was captivated, hanging on my every word. But they forgot one crucial detail. I said, a fierce smile breaking across my face. I am Big Mama granddaughter. I inherited her resilience, her brilliant mind, and her absolute refusal to break under pressure. We are not just reclaiming a physical house today, we are reclaiming a stolen legacy, and we are sharing it with the women who actually deserve the capital to change the entire world. The room erupted into deafening, roaring applause. I stepped down from the podium and accepted a pair of oversized golden scissors from my newly appointed foundation director. With one swift, confident motion, I cut the thick silk ribbon draped across the main archway. The cheers swelled louder, echoing beautifully off the vaulted ceilings. Behind the podium, a massive flat-screen monitor displayed the live financial feeds from the New York Stock Exchange. Vanguard Tech was not just surviving the scandal, it was absolutely dominating the market. Once I had purged the executive suite of Thomas and Marcus' incompetent cronies and implemented my own rigorous security protocols, the tech world had responded with explosive enthusiasm. The green stock ticker running across the bottom of the screen showed Vanguard Tech shares hitting an all-time record high, a staggering 40% surge under my direct, unapologetic leadership. The company was clean, highly profitable, and utterly untouchable. I accepted a crystal flute of vintage champagne from a passing waiter and turned my gaze away from the monitor, looking toward the large bay windows facing the street. The weather outside had turned violently foul just as the sun began to set. A freezing, torrential downpour was hammering the pavement, flooding the gutters. Through the rain-slicked glass, I could clearly see the public bus stop situated at the far corner of the estate property line. Standing under the meager rusting shelter of the metal awning was Chloe. She was completely soaked to the bone. The glamorous designer coats, the diamond earrings, and the arrogant sneer were entirely gone. Instead, she was shivering uncontrollably in a hideous, ill-fitting polyester fast food uniform, the bright neon logo plastered across her chest, acting like a scarlet letter. She clutched a flimsy plastic grocery bag over her head, desperately trying to shield herself from the relentless driving rain. The $2 million civil judgment I had won against her had completely wiped out her existence. She was utterly bankrupt, blacklisted from every corporate job in the state, and forced to work a minimum wage shift just to afford a room in a boarding house. She looked exhausted, broken, and entirely destitute. As I watched, she glanced up toward the brilliantly lit windows of the mansion. Even through the rain, I could see her face contort into a mask of bitter, helpless regret. Just as she looked away, a passing delivery truck drove through a deep pothole, splashing a massive wave of dirty, muddy water entirely over her uniform. I watched her shoulders slump in absolute total defeat as she wiped the muddy water from her face. The contrast was perfectly poetic. She was exactly where she belonged, standing in the freezing rain, waiting for a bus that was running late at the very edge of the property she used to rule. I turned my back to the window, completely dismissing her from my mind and letting the warmth and joyous laughter of the gala wash over me. I walked back toward the center of the room, surrounded by people who respected me. I raised my champagne glass toward the ceiling, looking up at the beautifully restored crown molding. To Big Mama, I whispered, speaking directly to the spirit of the woman who had trusted me to make things right. The legacy is safe. I took a slow, triumphant sip of champagne as the vibrant, powerful sounds of my true family filled the ancestral home. Fade to black. The ultimate lesson here is that true vindication does not come from stooping to the level of toxic abusers. Instead, it stems from radical independence, setting ironclad boundaries, and quietly building your own success. This journey proves that blood does not always define family, and enduring generational trauma is never a requirement for loyalty. By severing ties with toxic relatives, the protagonist reclaimed her narrative and secured her legacy. The best revenge is living a brilliantly successful, authentic life, completely free from their control. Share your stories of overcoming toxic environments below, and subscribe for more empowering narratives of resilience.